Chapter 12:18. You're not worthy. These 3 words were like a bolt from the blue. It fiercely struck Reynolds's head, shattering his spirit, dignity, and pride, leaving not a single shred of it behind. He was a very competitive person. As the son of the famous Ashbringer, his noble birth did not make him lose his desire to fight. He always wanted to be a hero like his father, but as the son of the Ashbringer, he was always shrouded in his father's light. His competitive nature did not want to rely on his father's protection. He wanted to prove to his father that he was a brave and fearless warrior. Unfortunately, Renaud was born at the wrong time. Ever since Alexandros successfully became a paladin, Renaud had been trained as a paladin. In fact, his talent was not too bad. It would not be a problem for him to become a third-rate paladin. However, because the alliance had Duque, the strongest group of paladins was basically preserved. The top paladins were the 4 Silver Saints and Alexandros. Below them were Riadeline, Abendis, Bolvar, and Reginald Windsor. The third-rate paladins Duque did not care about them at all. However, Renaud's own strength was not just one level lower. All right. The alliance did not lack paladins, but they lacked priests. Without a priest, Duque would be in a difficult position. Not only did he have to use Benedettas, who he knew was a scam, Duque did not hesitate to drag Kalia along. In the end, he remembered that Sally did not fall into the Scarlet Crusade in this life. In the end, Duque, who was roping in able-bodied men all over the world, captured Sally as well. As a result, after the Molten Core expedition, Sally Whitemane, who was Renaud's childhood friend, suddenly became the new heroine of the alliance. The entire Holy Church was singing Sally's name. What new generation saintess, what hope of the Holy Light, it was as mushy could be. Without comparison, there would be no harm. The adopted daughter that he brought back became a hero, while his own son looked like a mediocre paladin. It would be strange if Alexandros had a good expression. The old man did not approve of Renaud's performance. He found fault with his son everywhere and often reprimanded Renaud in public. This made Renaud, who was extremely proud, very unhappy. In fact, the great lord had always hoped that his son would become a true hero. Perhaps this was what it meant to be resentful of iron for not becoming steel. If it had been another family, perhaps the father and son would have been able to reach some sort of balance and continue to maintain their reputation. Unfortunately, their surname is Mograine. From the old Lordaeron to the new Lordaeron, from the Turinas to the Kalia eras, their every move would be magnified infinitely. Almost on the same night that Reynolds was reprimanded, rumors began to spread in the city. High Lord Alessandro was going to abolish the elder and replace the younger with the younger, so that his youngest son, Darian Mograine, would inherit the title. He was even going to take back the famous Ashbringer, when Theon retired. Darian was Alexandros' youngest son. Like most families, Alexandros loved his youngest son very much, which also caused Reynolds to be extremely jealous of his younger brother. 3 days later, Reynolds suddenly came looking for his father. Marshal Mograine. The scourge has been spotted upstream of the Soderel River, west of Stratholme. In the military camp in the city, Reynolds rushed back with a scout who was half covered in blood and had been hit by a dark magic spell. Alessandro immediately stood up and clapped his hands, using exorcism, to expel the dark power from the scout's body. What? How many soldiers are there? About 3,000 normal bones, 500 ghouls, more than 20 low-level death knights, and a possibly mid-level lich, the scout replied weakly. Alessandro handed the scout over to the army's priest and took out an epic weapon from his dimensional bag, the Hammer of Fate, that looked like 2 large bones attached to a stick. This crimson weapon was not just a little bit inferior to the Ashbringer he used before, but it was still an item of Mount Hygel level, so it was passable. Gather the mobile troops on duty. Move out immediately. After giving the order, Alessandro turned to look at Abendis. Alfred, I'll leave Stratholme to you. Don't worry. They were old partners, so they could understand each other's thoughts with just a look. While the floating fortress Naxxramas was running around the world, the two of them were basically guarding the Stratholme area. Abendis, who was better at defense, was in charge of guarding the city, while old Mograine, who was stronger in attack, was in charge of cleaning up the remnants of the scourge. Under old Mograine's leadership, a team of 50 professionals, mainly paladins, accompanied by 300 knights and 2,000 rapid response infantry, set off from Stratholme. The so-called rapid response infantry was, to put it bluntly, infantry who could barely ride horses. Their skills were not enough for them to fight on war horses, so they purely used horses as a means of rapid movement. When they got close to the battlefield, they would dismount and fight in traditional infantry phalanxes. Originally, when Duque set up this unit, he wanted to call it the Dragon Cavalry according to the customs on Earth. However, he was strongly criticized by a certain queen from the Sleeping Dragon Temple. How dare they call themselves Dragon Cavalry without riding dragons? In the end, they changed it to the Rapid Response Infantry. In flat areas, the Alliance had basically deployed tanks, but in areas with complex terrain, where gnome helicopters had not yet been popularized, the traditional Griffin Knights and cavalry were still the most useful. The scourge was the most troublesome thing. Once it appeared, it would spread like the plague if it was not put out immediately. If they did not leave it alone for 3 days, the scourge could turn all living people within a radius of hundreds of kilometers into zombies. Ordinary local armies had no way of dealing with the remnants of the scourge. The only thing they could do now was to improve the warning system as much as possible, and then use the elites to wipe them out. Under the reconnaissance and guidance of the Griffin Knights, old Mograine and his team quickly arrived at the scene. What made them angry was that the scourge was planning to pour pots of unknown green substances into the river. Needless to say, it was most likely a deadly poison. This made old Mograine furious. The Soderer River was not only the dividing line between the East and West Plaguelands, but also a very important lifeline for the entire Lordaeron kingdom. The water that flowed from its source ran from north to south across the entire Lordaeron kingdom, and its tributaries watered 70% of the kingdom's farmland. Not only that, but in the middle of the river was a very important inland freshwater lake, Lake Daramir. Not long ago, Duque had reached an agreement with the Hydrathean water elemental. The water elemental had sent experts to purify Lake Daramir and turn it into Lordaeron's most important freshwater fish farm. Chapter 12:19. To the south of the river, the water would flow through the most fertile Hillsbrad Hills in the entire Lordaeron continent, irrigate places like Terran Mill, and finally flow into the sea at the edge of South Sea City. It was no exaggeration to say that the Soderer River was the lifeline of half of the Lordaeron continent. What the Calamity Army was doing now was forcing millions of people to their deaths. Attack! Raising the Hammer of Fate high up, the entire rapid response force looked down from the sky and turned into a huge arrow that charged toward the Calamity Army by the river. The charge of thousands of warhorses created the momentum of an army of thousands. The earth was shaking, and the sky was shaking. Kill these bones. The soldiers' blood was boiling. Following the famous hero, Ashbringer Mograine, to charge was the battle they pursued. Even if they were led by the nose by the Calamity Army, they still chased after each battle without hesitation. Because every battle against the undead was given honor. This was a battle of honor to protect their families and the beautiful creatures of this world. Due to the limitations of their talents, they would never have the chance to step into the realm of heroes and participate in the epic battles that were praised by bards for thousands of years. They were only mortals. However, even if they bled to the last drop of their blood, they would never regret it. This was because the great commander of the Alliance, Duke Marcus, once said, "Those who use their lives and souls to protect their beliefs and hopes are already heroes. Your heroic deeds will always be worthy of respect." This sentence inspired them every day, every moment, every minute, and every second. Mortals could also use their powers to protect this world. Charge! Alexandros led Renault and the Paladins and took the lead in breaking through the enemy's formation. On the two flanks behind them, the Alliance's lieutenants had the infantrymen slow down and dismount 200 yards away from the enemy. After a short jog, a neat battle line that could be measured with a ruler was formed. When the battle began, it was already an invincible battle formation that could sweep away all obstacles in its path. The infantrymen followed closely behind the cavalry and spread out a battle line that was 500 meters long. They used one-handed hammers and other blunt weapons to destroy every undead that blocked their way. Everything was going smoothly until they went deep into the enemy's formation. Suddenly, they realized that almost every inch of land on the shore and the place they had just rushed through was shaking. Countless undead crawled out from the ground. A trap. Alexandros was shocked. If it was just low-level undead creatures like zombies and skeleton soldiers, he wouldn't care if there were hundreds of thousands of them. The important thing was that they were all intermediate undead at the level of bone devils and ghouls. They were also accompanied by a large number of hatred beasts and zombie dogs. This was not an enemy an ordinary soldier with a demon slayer enchanted longsword could deal with. Everyone, head south. Old Mograine raised, hammer of fate, and pointed south. Hee. It's a wise judgment, but unfortunately, it's meaningless. Along with a cold laugh, Kel Thuzad's undying figure wrapped in an evil aura appeared on top of a small hill in the direction they came from. A large number of high-ranking Death Knights and high-ranking liches appeared from all four directions, and the ones leading them were people that Alexandros was familiar with. You. Old Mograine's voice was choked with emotion. The few people that came into view were all powerhouses that he had high hopes for. They were just a little bit away from stepping into the hero realm. Duchess Blomu, Sir Zeliek, Lord Kurtaz. Mograine had all worked with them before. He was even more clear that Blomu and Zeliek had developed feelings for each other and had become lovers after spending a long time together. He had wanted to attend their wedding after the Cataclysm attack, but who would have thought? Now they had undoubtedly stepped into the hero realm, but unfortunately, they were Death Knights. It was as if they were breaking through the waves and easily killed the elites trained by old Mograine. They reached Mograine almost effortlessly. Join us. You will become the head of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Blomua's eyes were filled with dark magic and emitted a strange light. Old Mograine did not say anything and directly swung his warhammer at the 3 Death Knights. This was not the first time, nor would it be the last. As long as a comrade died and became an undying, then they would be enemies in another world. Alexandros roared 3 times, and with each roar, he easily sent a horseman of the apocalypse flying. This power. Hee. Kel Thuzad looked at old Mograine, and his red eyes flickered non-stop. Suddenly, he attacked. Bind. Dozens of greenish-black chains of dark energy appeared from the void and bound Mograine tightly in an instant. What made the surrounding soldiers even more frightened was that Alexandros' eldest son, Reynold, actually stabbed his sword into his father's chest. The blade pierced through the joint under the left armpit, through the lung, and straight into the heart. No matter how thick the plate armor was, it could not protect this area. When Reynold's sneak attack broke through the thin layer of chainmail at the armpit joint, the result was already decided. It's over. Father. Your brutal rule over me is over. Ha. Reynold's eyes were red, with the same scarlet glow as Kel Thuzad's. At this moment, anyone would know that Reynold's soul had already fallen. At this moment, there was one less holy knight in the world, and one more Death Knight. Ha. Without you binding me, I'm finally free. Ha. Reynold laughed wildly. He did not notice the abnormality of his father's body. Alexandros, who should have been fatally injured and could not even speak, suddenly let out a long sigh. Yes. It's time to end. Although I always wanted to believe that you were not the second Arthas. What? Reynold was terrified. He suddenly realized that the assassination that he had carefully prepared for so long and simulated countless times in his mind had failed. The illusion in front of him faded, and Reynold finally saw that he had stabbed a water elemental that looked exactly like his father. It was not his father. His father was standing at the side with the fiercest and coldest gaze, staring at him. No. Impossible? Reynold cried out in shock. There are many things that are impossible. Following old Mograine's cold laugh, Kel Thuzad was shocked to find that the teleportation barrier he had carefully set up was torn apart. Hundreds of teleportation gates appeared outside the Scourge army. With Tyrant as the leader, the Alliance powerhouses all appeared. Chapter 12:20. The High Priestess of the Night Elves raised her hand gently, and countless pieces of the stars drew a beautiful arc in the air, falling from the sky and landing on the heads of the undead creatures. Most of the undead creatures would take such an attack head-on. Only a few of the Scourge Army's powerhouses could avoid this attack. In the face of Tyron's attack, the three horsemen of the apocalypse had no choice but to roll miserably with their skeletal warhorses and fall from the hillside. Only then did they manage to roll out of the range of the meteor fragments. Rumble. There were loud noises as the meteors exploded where the undead creatures were gathered. The scorching air current swept across the battlefield. After a large number of bones were smashed into pieces, even the dregs were sent flying more than 10 meters away by the successive shockwaves. The remaining Rotterdam warriors exclaimed and gasped in surprise as they found that most of the undead creatures had been wiped out. Turalian, Sidan Dathrahan, and Abendis, the three paladin warriors, arrived at the same time. The holy light on their bodies was so dazzling that it was like three moving, blazing mountains of gold. All the impure creatures near them were swept into the golden light and completely melted. For the Lich. The newly born Death Knight did not even have time to use his soul to shout the slogan before he was completely drowned in the holy flames. Kel Thuzad watched as the Death Knights he was so proud of had their armors destroyed in front of him by the holy light, which was equivalent to high heat for the undead. Their hard and withered muscles, dry bones, and clumped-up internal organs were revealed. Then, the dark aura that lingered around their bodies was blown away as if it was evaporating. Finally, their entire bodies, along with their fallen souls, turned into ashes. The chief Great Lich under the Lich King was stunned on the spot. The Alliance's powerhouses had arrived at the right time. They were so accurate that they had arrived within seconds. This could not be a coincidence. Even if they had suddenly received a distress signal, they would not have had enough armor to wear in such a short time. How could they have mobilized so many powerhouses in one go? It could only be said that the Alliance must have received the news long ago and used Renault's rebellion to prepare a big trap for the Scourge Army. If Kel Thuzad's sweat glands could still function, he would probably be sweating profusely by now. Kel Thuzad. Repent for what you have done to tarnish the sun well. Following Sylvanas' angry roar, an arrow emitting dazzling lightning seemed to shoot from the distant sky, easily hitting Kel Thuzad's magic shield. The whole space around the Grand Lich seemed to tremble slightly, and countless dark lines spread out from the point of contact between the magic shield and the tip of the arrow, intertwining with the lightning triggered by the power of thunder in a dazzling flash. The two forces intertwined and formed a huge net. In the next instant, more golden lights collided with the net. It was a long-range attack from the artifact, Quell Zarum. At that moment, the golden holy light and the purple lightning finally suppressed the dark and icy aura. The three powers formed a sharp whistle, followed by a huge explosion. The explosion shone with a blinding light, but that was it. Everyone was surprised to see this scene. Kel Thuzad actually stopped under the intense impact and light of the explosion. No. Every expert from the Alliance wanted to shout out the word impossible, but the air seemed to have become as sticky as glue. What now? The warriors who came with old Mograine were the most confused about the situation. They thought it was an ordinary extermination of the remnants of the Scourge Army, but it turned into a decisive battle with the main force of the Scourge Army. They saw that Alexandros had the upper hand, but suddenly the son of the Ashbringer betrayed them and stabbed his father's vital point. It felt like a repeat of the tragedy of Arthas killing his father. They thought that it was going to be a tragedy this time, but who knew that the experts of the Alliance would arrive and turn the situation around again? Who knew that when the Alliance saw that they had the upper hand, it was as if time had stopped? What was it this time? To the surprise of all the living, the Scourge Army also heard cries of surprise. They saw the faces of the Death Knights with bewildered expressions. An evil will from the faraway stars, from the darkest void of the universe, had descended. When the projection of the huge will descended on this battlefield, the space shook. The length and width of the battlefield were at least 3,000 meters, and it could collapse at any time because it could not withstand the huge pressure. In their field of vision, the entire shoreline of the wide and turbulent Sotoril River was twisted like a fried dough twist. The sand and stones on the ground floated into the air as if they were defying gravity. The wide battlefield had become the most incredible and strange space. The rapid river slammed against the riverbank, and there should have been a loud sound like a huge wave hitting a reef, but no one could hear any sound. The only sound that everyone heard was a strange sound. If one had to describe what this sound sounded like, it could only be said that it sounded like a monster with a big mouth chewing a large amount of glass shards in its mouth. The will that stood at the pinnacle of evil had an extremely strong pressure that spread in all directions. It made the low-level undead creatures fall to the ground and tremble, not daring to move an inch. The middle and high-level undead creatures lowered their heads and did not dare to look directly at the projection. The faces of the mortal soldiers were all pale, and their foreheads were dripping with cold sweat. Their eyes had turned dark because of extreme fear, and they could not see anything. Their hearts were like a lonely boat drawn into a terrifying whirlpool that could capsize at any time and drown in the endless tide of death. The one that appeared was one of the 3 heads of the Burning Legion, Kill Jaden. The huge red demon leader laughed sinisterly, "Yo! The ants that dare to defy the will of the Legion, and the despicable traitors that dare to betray me, it's time to settle accounts." Ha 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 ha. Accompanied by the demon's wanton laughter, everyone on the battlefield was horrified to find that the space was distorting further. Kill Jaden seemed to want to tear the entire battlefield into pieces, or throw it out of the world of Azeroth. "Get closer to me," Ronan shouted. Spatial magic was not Ronan's specialty. As a genius in the arcane system, Ronan also had good attainments in spatial magic. Especially under Duque's guidance, Ronan was instilled with a large amount of ordinary astronomical knowledge that he thought was common knowledge. To a native of the world of Azeroth, this was undoubtedly a great awakening. Ronan's spatial magic improved by leaps and bounds because of this. It was obviously unrealistic to protect everyone from the demon leader's shocking conspiracy. The only people Ronan could protect were the strongest people around him. Chapter 12:21. Quite a few powerhouses closed in on Ronan, but 2 of them were too far away to bother. This was because Sylvanas and Tyrande were already in front of Kel Thuzad. For Kuel Salus. Sylvanas angrily attacked Kel Thuzad. She would never be able to forgive him. Even if Kel Thuzad didn't personally harm her people, she would still be able to do so. However, it was to resurrect this bastard that Arthas slaughtered a city, burned Eversong Forest, destroyed Silvery Moon City, and destroyed the Sunwell. Fool. Even in this state, he still wanted to destroy his enemy first. Kel Thuzad's skeletal eyes flashed with red light. Even though the surrounding space was almost stagnant, and he was in the center of the time stop, the frost-like white spell runes still flashed above Kel Thuzad's white finger bones one after another. He stretched out his hand and pointed at the void, instantly freeing himself. "Kill Jaden. If you were in Azeroth right now, you might really succeed." The Lich grinned, his white lower jaw seeming to make a mocking expression. The Great Lich's huge finger bones pointed, and the white runes burned like flames. It burned fiercely, forming an illusory ice scepter. This scepter was like a battering ram, and with a wave of Kel Thuzad's arms, it slammed into the void heavily. It was clearly a scepter, but it was full of violent aesthetics. The impact it produced was so strong that the void in front of everyone slightly paused. Void Recall. This evil spell could instantly destroy the spatial shackles of the same level or even higher than the caster, teleporting the caster to a previously designated location. However, like all other emergency escape spells, the backlash was equally shocking. Even with Kel Thuzad's strength as a Breaking Dawn Great Lich, he would inevitably be greatly injured after returning. On the other side, Tyrande glanced at Ronan in the distance, who had already used a purple arcane shield to cover several people. She knew that there was no time to lose. Suddenly, she was wrapped in a milky white light, and her whole body shot out like an arrow. She grabbed Sylvanas and slammed into the light produced by Kel Thuzad's teleportation. "You." Kel Thuzad suddenly felt a strong sense of fear towards these 2 mortals. He didn't know if his magic was enough to take the three of them out of Kill Jaden's wide space trap. But in the next moment, he immediately discovered that Tyrande was only using the power of the moon goddess to bind him. She did not interfere with his magic. Ha ha ha. You will regret this. Kel Thuzad's laughter echoed in the void. At the last moment, Servanas spat out a mouthful of blood and fainted. Returning to the present. After listening to Balver's report, Duque's face turned green, and his hands trembled as he held the report. Something terrible had happened. Ronan, Turalian, Alfred Abendis, and Sidan Dathrahan have disappeared during the teleportation. Their whereabouts are unknown. Tyrande Whisperwind and Sylvanas Windrunner have been captured by Kel Thuzad for some reason. Now, Her Majesty the Moon Goddess Alun has sent a request to the Alliance for help. She is doing her best to protect the two of them from being killed, but time is limited. Alexandros Mograine is seriously injured and is currently recuperating in Lordaeron. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that this counterattack, which had gathered a large number of Alliance powerhouses, could be said to be a complete failure. Just this report alone made the joy of killing Nefarian disappear into the abyss. Duque was speechless for a long time. Beside him, the weak Kalia was already bawling loudly. Elugia hugged her tightly, not knowing how to comfort her. Sasha was frozen on the spot, not knowing what to do. Every hero that returned from Blackwing's nest had ashen faces. Kill Jaden's desire to destroy Azeroth had never died. Duque had always known this. But he didn't expect Sir Swindler to be so ruthless this time. He actually took both sides. Should he say that it was no wonder he was called the Swindler? The information must have been leaked somewhere. Duque already knew that Reynold was a troublemaker. Since there was the tragedy of Arthas killing his father in this life, Duque didn't dare to pretend to be a saint. He was sure that Reynold would be good. So he reminded Alexandros and secretly told Abendis. He even arranged for a possible counterattack in advance. But he didn't expect it to be used, and it almost hit Kel Thuzad in the face. The only thing he didn't expect was that the mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. As expected, neither the cunning Kill Jaden nor the sinister ancient god were easy to deal with. Magni came up and patted Duque's shoulder. Duque. I don't dare to say that I can understand how you feel when your lover is snatched away, but I have to remind you that you are now the commander of the Alliance. You have to make a decision as soon as possible. Tell every warrior in the Alliance what to do. Varian and the others are being held back by the hacker greenskins. If we still have to go on an expedition, we can only rely on the few of us. Duque looked around. Although every hero's eyes were still full of spirit, Duque knew that their mental and physical strength had reached their limits. Magni, Grom and Kane were all injured. Kill Jaden's trap had caused the Alliance to temporarily lose 7 of their main heroes. Aurelia, Varian and the others were being held back by the trolls. In addition to the Silithus's Zerg riot, they couldn't count on the Horde either. Whether it was the Alliance or the Horde, they couldn't hope to form a decent hero group in a short period of time. However, without a hero group, entering Naxxramas or on Kiraj would be suicide. Everyone stared at him, hoping that he would come up with a solution. They also didn't want to give Duque too much pressure. They didn't have a choice. This was because, under the trickster Kill Jaden's plot, the evil forces hidden around the world had already begun their attack. If they didn't do anything, Azeroth would be destroyed before the Burning Legion's main force arrived. At this moment, Duque finally felt the weight on his shoulders. He took a deep breath and exhaled the turbid air from his lungs. Duque raised his head slightly. His clear voice echoed in the entire Stormwind Council Hall. I have to admit that our enemies are very strong. They are strong, terrifying, sinister, far-sighted and numerous. However, this isn't a reason for us to give in and retreat. Since Kill Jaden has the ability to gather so many evil forces together, shouldn't we eliminate them all at once? At once? Eliminate them all? Everyone almost thought that Duque was talking in his sleep. Duque smiled and turned to look at Magni. I announce that Area 51 will be unsealed immediately. It seems that we have to use that thing inside. That thing. Magni's eyes instantly lit up. Chapter 1222. Area 51, DuPont's Bad Taste. This was a top-secret area that only relevant craftsmen, scientists, and secret troops would enter. In the upper echelons of the Alliance, basically only 3 to 5 people in each kingdom knew of the existence of Area 51. However, thinking about Duque, the dwarves, and the gnomes, he had a rough idea of what was going on. My plan needs support from many parties. I'll summon the Dalajan Kiran Tor and Jurban urgently. Before that, I'll go look for Elun. Duque ran to the church of Elun in Stormwind City as if his butt was on fire. As a liaison and part of the strengthening of the alliance, Stormwind allowed Elun to preach in the kingdom. Thus, a small temple of the Moon Lady was built in a corner of the church district. Under the guidance of the priestess, Duque came all the way to the roofless main hall. Even during the day, Duque could easily sense the will of the goddess. Duke Marcus, you're here. No matter how many times the goddess gaze always gave Duque a sense of peace. Yes, goddess. I'm eager to know about my lover. They're both fine. My power is still protecting them for now. But you, who experienced the ancient war, know that my protection is never perfect. Duque was a little silent. Yes. He still remembered that in the ancient war, the Eridar Gemini had only forcefully dragged Tyron back to the twisting nether. This had cut off Tyron's connection with Elun, and then easily destroyed Tyron's mental defenses. If not for Duque playing infernal affairs in the Burning Legion and becoming a Void Lord, there might have been a fallen demoness called Tyrant Whisperwind in this life. Duque sighed. Kel, Thuzad and Arthes wouldn't dare to go to the twisting nether even if they had 10,000 guts. Elun's illusory figure also sighed. I hope you know that Sylvanas Windrunner is not my priestess. My protection is not perfect for her. I'll do it as soon as possible. Duque gritted his teeth. You have a month. Elun nodded. Duque did not even dare to imagine how much divine power it would take to protect the high priest in the enemy's formation, but he also had to bring along a burden. In any case, Elun couldn't be more kind. Duque knew that this was all because he had once saved Azeroth. Duque bowed deeply. Thank you very much. I don't need your gratitude. I just want to punish Si Thun this time. Their craziness. Sigh. Although Elun and Si Thun and the other ancient gods were known as gods, they were completely different. Thanks to Daddy Blizzard's crazy setting changes, he had a good habit of eating his own settings. Duque, who had arrived a few years earlier, didn't know whether Elun was an ancient deity, an Azeroth astral soul, or a titan. In any case, they were the best allies on the side of justice. At this moment, in Naxxramas. If Kel Thuzad still had balls, he'd be in a lot of pain. In the core area of Naxxramas, there was now a terrifying specially made prison. 8 liches stared at the pair of beauties cuddling together in the middle of the prison day and night. Of course, for a group of liches who no longer had a penis, no matter how beautiful a mortal woman was, it had nothing to do with them. I advise you to give up quickly and join the Great Lich King. You won't last long. I will make one of you a Dark Ranger General, and the other my right-hand man. Kel Thuzad persuaded them to surrender. In the center of the Lich's vision, 2 beautiful women were hugging together, their red lips almost touching. If one didn't pay attention, they would really think that the 2 had been dead for a long time. In the eyes of the Undying, it was another scene. The 2's heartbeats were very slow, but their vitality was still strong. Their small noses gently touched each other, and after about a minute, a long and small breath came from one of their nostrils. It was purified by the power of the moon goddess on the surface of their bodies, and then inhaled into the other's nostrils. This was a state of suspended animation, similar to hibernation. Kel Thuzad gritted his teeth in hatred. It was bad enough that he was tricked by Kill Jaden, but he actually let 2 living people hitch a ride and escape. If he could kill the 2 of them and turn them into Undying, it would undoubtedly be a big success for the Scourge army. After all, they were the leaders of two kingdoms. Who knew that Alun would not hesitate to use a huge amount of divine power to forcibly transmit her power to protect the two of them? Kel Thuzad was mad. He used abominations to cut them, and a large number of liches to grind them. He tried almost everything, but he couldn't hurt the two women in the slightest. Originally, he wanted to starve them to death, but who knew that they actually had a way to enter a state of suspended animation, successfully stalling for time. Obviously, with his breaking dawn strength, he couldn't shake the protection of the moon goddess. Bastard. When the great lord wakes up, it will be the day of your fall. Kel Thuzad could only hope that Arthas, who had fused with the Lich King Na Zul, would wake up. Unfortunately, that seemed to be something that would happen in the indefinite future. After Arthas put on the Lich King's helmet, her entire body and soul were sealed on the frozen throne, and there was no more sound. The fusion of souls was very complicated, and no one could tell how long it would take. Kel Thuzad could only wait. On the other side, after Duque bid farewell to Alan, he waited for the Dalajan Kirin Tor senators. Duque first bowed to the Kirin Tor senators, then went straight to the point. As everyone knows, Chairman Ronan is temporarily missing. According to the previous agreement, I will exercise my authority as the Kirin Tor Senate substitute chairman, and temporarily take over the leadership of the Kirin Tor Senate. Of course. A few of the senators returned the bow. After the Dalajan kingdom was destroyed by the Scourge army, the neutrality of the Kirin Tor Senate had actually disappeared. This was because, including the new Dalajan city, almost the entire kingdom was rebuilt within the framework of the alliance. If in the past, the countries at most used the method of adding water to milk, now it was simply adding milk to water. In particular, a few of the senators had basically been forcefully pulled to the radiant moon level by Duque, so the Kirin Tor Senate had a new law that stated that any Breaking Dawn level mages in the alliance would be automatically regarded as the substitute chairman of the Kirin Tor Senate, regardless of their nationality. When the Dalajan Reagan and Miao Hong's elected chairman was absent, or was unable to perform the duties of a chairman, with the agreement of more than 3 senators, the substitute chairman would be able to take the position. Right now, Duque was just going through the motions. After a few words, Duque's long title had an additional Kirin Tor Senate. Very quickly, the great gnome craftsman Jurban Mekatok arrived. Duque looked around, looked at Jurban, Magni, and the few Kirin Tor Senate members, and said in a clear voice, "I announce. The sky-breaking plan, activate." Chapter 1223. Leonard was a low-grade lich. Since he was a human sky wizard when he was alive, his soul was captured by the Lich King after he died, and he naturally became a lich. In the barren lands, his undead soldiers were gathering the corpses of a village that had been slaughtered. The quality of orc skeletons and zombies is indeed better than that of humans. It's a pity that orcs don't have the chance to give birth to lich. It was a very ordinary sentence to himself, but in the end, he was shocked to find that it took dozens of times longer for his thoughts to be conveyed. Speed reduction. He realized something, but he was powerless to change the situation. He wanted to call for help, but none of the skeletons around him could sense his mental commands. In the next moment, his consciousness completely dissipated. He did not even know that a young wizard in a blue and white robe was standing behind him. Interesting. Very interesting. Duque touched Leonard's skull. The soul ability he learned from the Burning Legion came in handy. When Leonard's memories, as well as the spiritual communication channel and the Lich King's magic imprint, were all transferred to the system elf for categorization, Duque touched his chin. The so-called soul-searching spell is nothing more than this, right? Vanessa ridiculed Duque's actions at the right time. Oh. The terrifying Duke of Beasts' filth has finally broken through the sky. Have you fallen to the point where you won't even let go of the bones? Duque was speechless. Hey. Damned maid, don't speak nonsense. I didn't do anything out of line. Oh. You even used a white liquid to dye the black dragon princess white? Vanessa turned her head in disdain. Ugh. Vanessa's evidence was 2F** king sufficient. Duque was actually speechless. However, in the next moment, Duque raised his hand. Duque did not cast any spell, but a ball of flames flashed and turned the lich lying on the ground into ashes in a flash. The lich's clothes and equipment were not damaged at all. Master, tell Jaina to act according to plan. At the same time, Kel Thuzad felt extremely annoyed. After becoming a great lich, he thought that he had lost the emotions that a living person should have. Unfortunately, the mental attributes of anger and irritation remained in his soul. He did not know how long Duque's attack on Blackwing's nest would last, nor did he know if Jaden had a deeper plan against the Scourge army. He only knew that he had to take advantage of the fact that these living beings were busy taking care of themselves to gather more powerful servants for the Lich King. The Troll's riot is just a trick. The one who can truly influence this world is the one behind Angela. Kel Thuzad used the red light in his skull's eye sockets to scan the audience. There, the three horsemen of the apocalypse were using shadow energy to repair their bodies. At that time, Jaden's spatial trap was a little strange. It felt a little lacking in lethality. Although the Doomsday army suffered a lot of losses, it was not fatal. For example, among the three horsemen of the apocalypse, Kurtaz, who was the most heavily injured, had only lost his lower body. It was fatal to the living, but it was nothing more than that to the undying. Kel Thuzad was still dissatisfied. Not good enough. There must be a strong enough individual. It would be better if it was a paladin. After becoming a great lich, he had done a lot of inhuman experiments. He had basically come to the conclusion that the strongest undying must be transformed from the strongest living beings. Without the living, there would be no dead. The growth of the Scourge army still needed to be filled by strong living beings. This was not good news for Kel Thuzad, who believed in the supremacy of the dead. Before the Lich King woke up again, as a servant, Kel Thuzad could only follow the existing rules. Looking at Renaud Mograine, who was standing a little further away, Kel Thuzad felt a little annoyed. This kid had not shown his value at all. If he had succeeded in assassinating his father and dragged the famous Ashbringer into the realm of the dead, Kel Thuzad might have given him the position of a second-rate leader. But now, a third-rate Death Knight, scram to where you want to go. Raising his huge palm, his sharp bony fingers pointed to the east. Kel Thuzad ordered, Naxxramas, begin movement. Target, South Sea City. Kel Thuzad's memories as a human were not that long ago. He was very clear that humans were fragile creatures that would starve to death without food. At this time, in the Eastern Kingdom, the production areas of the southern continent were concentrated in the western wilderness and the elven forest. The problem was that the despicable Duque had managed Stormwind like an iron bucket. The Sentinel territory had been upgraded to a Sentinel stronghold, forming a defensive chain with the West Spring stronghold. In addition, a large number of cavalry and tanks formed a rapid response force, making the small forces of the Scourge army useless. In order to show the power of the Scourge army and let the once suppressed cult of the Cursed rise again, Kel Thuzad thought that it was necessary to destroy the capital of the Alliance as an example. Just like what Arthas had done 6 years ago. South Sea City, this was a miracle city that had developed from a small seaside town 20 years ago. As an important port connecting the northern and southern continents by sea, South Sea City's defense was also not bad. However, it still lacked the foundation of an old kingdom's main city. The city walls could be completed by the dwarves' machinery, but the magic protection rune engraving work on the city walls could not be done quickly. A mage's magic and mental strength were limited. Even the strongest mage could only spend an hour a day engraving magic runes. Therefore, the magic protection level of South Sea City could only be considered below average. In fact, the same situation was happening in New Lordaeron City, but Kel Thuzad thought that His Majesty the Lich King would be more interested in attacking Lordaeron City himself. The time he chose was very sneaky, letting Naxxramas approach in the air just after nightfall. If everything went well, Naxxramas could raid South Sea City at around 12 o'clock in the middle of the night. For humans, nighttime was a time when their field of vision was greatly reduced, but for the undead who could only perceive the outside world with their souls, this was the golden time of the undead. Everything seemed to be going well, until Kel Thuzad was shocked to see a huge floating island no smaller than Naxxramas in the sky above South Sea City. That is, Kel Thuzad would never forget the domed purple mage towers that stood on the island. That was the crystallization of magic wisdom that had been settled for 2,800 years. It was also a testament to human magic civilization. Although it had been destroyed by the Scourge army once, it was obvious that it had been rebuilt. And it appeared in a new form in front of the Scourge army. Kel Thuzad's voice was almost whispering, Dalajan. After returning to Azeroth, Duque built a power furnace just like before, but he found that this thing could not make any ship or even a piece of metal fly. Duque was disappointed for a long time, and secretly asked Ronan, Jaina, and Magna Aegwin to form a team to research. Not long ago, in a secret experiment in the Dalajan, Duque successfully made a small mage tower fly 10 meters above the ground. He finally understood what the problem was. The Titan's propulsion reactor's area of effect was limited to objects that had been strengthened by high-intensity and high-density magic circuits. Ordinary objects that had not been strengthened by magic circuits could not be used. The surface buildings and underground areas of the Dalajan had been strengthened by countless generations of mages in the past 2,800 years, and had long become a true magic creation. In fact, 2 months ago, Duque had already asked Jurban to build a replica of the giant void power furnace engine. It was all for today. Of the 2 largest mage towers in Dalaran, one was dark and lifeless, while the other was radiating a resplendent light. That was the Breaking Dawn Archmage Duque's mage tower. However, the one in charge of this mage tower was one of Duque's acknowledged partners, Radiant Moon Archmage Jaina Proudmoore. Report. The Scourge's floating fortress, Naxxramas, is in range, Jaina Goldsword informed Jaina. Do you want to go? Magna smiled. Jaina waved her hand, and her voice came from her dantian as she ordered, Light of the Dalajan, prepare to fire. The so-called Light of the Dalajan was actually the mana of all the mage towers gathered together, and after the magic was synchronized with the 12 largest mage towers, the mana would be poured into a giant magic formation that had been prepared beforehand, and the mana would be shaped and shot out. In theory, as long as it was hit by one shot, even the largest battleship in the gold world would be reduced to nothing. But that was only in theory, because no one had tried the cannon-level large-scale war magic that Duque spoke of. If they were unlucky, they would be blown into pieces before hitting the enemy, and then be scattered evenly on the ground. That was not a rare thing. Yes, a gnome named Daitra always said that explosions are art. That was the best way to describe it. With Jaina as the leader, the Radiant Moon Archmages spread their senses to every main mana transmission channel in the Dalajan city, nervously monitoring everything. When the display that represented the mana filled up the channel turned from white to yellow, and then from yellow to orange, all the Kirin Tor counselors present, as well as the Radiant Moon Archmages from the various countries, looked at each other. Those who agree to fire, raise your hands. Jaina said loudly. This was the final vote. If they succeeded, this would be an epic-making scene in the world of Azeroth.
If they failed, the consequences would be borne by all the mages. When all the Dalajan had reached a consensus, Jaina ordered in a clear and powerful voice, fire. At the same time, several fingers pressed on several magic rune buttons. 12 purplish-blue light beams over 5 meters wide shot out from the 12 Dalajan Radiant Moon Mage Towers. Like 12 o'clock, they gathered neatly on the tallest and largest Breaking Dawn Mage Tower in the center of the Dalajan. Jaina closed her eyes tightly, using all her strength to control this terrifying power that exceeded her limits. Finally, after 1/18 of a second, she successfully followed the magic circuit that Duque had set up in advance and pushed out the huge amount of mana that had gathered. At this moment, the pitch-black night sky that had originally been pitch-black became as bright as day. The arcane energy looked like a solid substance. When it was ejected, it looked like the entire Soderal River was rushing forward. In less than 2 seconds, the exaggerated energy cannon covered a distance of 10,000 meters and fiercely stabbed into the wall of the Scourge Army's floating fortress, Naxxramas. Although the magical shield had been activated, this level of shield still seemed weak under the terrifying bombardment of the main cannon. The outer wall of the fortress, which had been processed by who knew how many generations of people, and the outer armor of the fortress that was as hard as diamond, could not even resist for half a second. The defense was immediately declared a failure.
Chapter 12:25. The third Mage Tower's magic circuit has collapsed due to overload. Number 7-2. We've lost contact with number 11. In Duque's Breaking Dawn Mage Tower, a large number of intermediate mages were in a mess. There were cheers of joy, screams of dutiful commanders, and reports from the indifferent. Jaina frowned a little, because this meant that the quality of the Dalajan Radiant Moon Mage Tower was mixed. Like the earth-shattering main cannon shot just now, it was impossible to fire a second shot in the next few months. Moreover, the entire Dalajan command structure needed to be further adjusted and reorganized. What kind of mess was this? Soon after, her beautiful golden eyebrows relaxed. No matter what, at least the result was good. On the huge magic mirror screen, one could clearly see that after the arcane light cannon shot, the beam pierced through the outer wall of the fortress and reached the inside. The surrounding space was blasted into a mess by the highly concentrated arcane energy, and many places instantly burned. The strange purple-blue arcane fire could be clearly seen from 10 kilometers away. There was an explosion. The tremor was accompanied by a loud rumble that shook the entire Naxxramas fortress. In the central command room of the fortress, all the liches stood up. The high-level liches floating in the air were of course unharmed, but most of the low-level liches lost their footing and fell to the ground. The scene was very ugly. What's going on? Kel Thuzad was terrified as he pounced towards a crystal ball-like object not far from him. Just now, he felt that he had lost his spiritual connection with several monster leaders. He couldn't believe that this was true. However, when he observed the damaged area through the monitoring crystal ball, anyone could feel that the frost aura lingering around Kel Thuzad's body was many times stronger. He was angry. He was afraid again. In the monitoring world, thick smoke billowed everywhere, and green liquid exploded everywhere. The monsters that had lost their leaders and were incomplete were moving around randomly, even madly biting their companions. With just one attack, the plague area, one of the 4 major areas of Naxxramas, was almost completely destroyed. The plague messenger Noise, Filthy Hygen, and Lotheb, the 3 leaders, were directly smashed to pieces. At this moment, a female scream attracted Kel Thuzad's attention. The Dalajan main cannon is charging. What? Kel Thuzad looked at the monitor screen in horror. The 12 mage towers that had just stopped began to light up with huge purplish-blue halos. He immediately recognized that it was the glow of high-purity arcana techniques. There's a second shot. Kel Thuzad didn't notice that his voice had changed due to fear. What kind of joke was this? How could such a terrifying thing be fired continuously? With that kind of power, unless it was the Lich King himself, any existence below the level of a demigod would definitely be turned into ashes. Naxxramas' siren was very characteristic of the undead. The wall between the plague area and the spider area is broken. The arcane energy is beginning to spread in the spider district. The cursing disciple's messenger's voice was extremely shrill. Farina was hopping mad. Close the protective wall. Send Bonehead to save the spider eggs. Quick. Kel Thuzad's huge skeletal claw grabbed the Black Witch's shoulder. Shut up. I can't save those damn spider eggs now. In order to prevent the disaster from spreading, the damaged area must be temporarily abandoned. We can't give up. Pa. The Great Lich slapped his disobedient subordinate in the face. Organize a counterattack. Engage in close combat before the Dalajan is done recharging. Use the Great Lich King's power of death to drown this damn Sky City. Kel Thuzad was now more like a gambler who had lost too much. He was betting. Betting that the Dalajan didn't have such a huge magic reserve. Betting that the Dalajan couldn't fire the second shot. At this moment, in the Dalajan's command center, the mages saw that Naxxramas didn't retreat but instead advanced, and they were a little scared. Did our deception plan fail? Gina Goldsword asked, trembling. No, it succeeded. It also failed. Gina rubbed her eyebrows. The so-called recharging just now was actually just following the brocade bag that Duque had left behind. She had a bunch of Radiant Moon mages put the arcane light on the mage tower and pretend to recharge it. If they could scare Naxxramas away, that would be the best. Magna, who had turned into a female high elf, put her hands on her hips. It looks like Kel Thuzad wants to kill us all and turn us all into liches. Then he can make up for his losses. The arrogant were afraid of the reckless, and the reckless were afraid of the reckless. Undead soldiers didn't care about money, and they didn't care about their lives. If left alone, they would definitely increase in numbers. They were worse than hooligans. Every elite in the Alliance had to go through 16 years of adulthood, and then a few years or even 10 years of training. Mages were even rarer. This kind of exchange was definitely not what Gina wanted. Moreover, with the data from today's main canon experiment, they could take it back and study it. When everything was ready and the main canon was upgraded to the perfect version, they would definitely have a much higher chance of winning. Magna saw the hesitation on Gina's face. What? Should we retreat? After all, there's still that one. Jaina brushed her brilliant blonde hair back valiantly. How is that possible? If we destroy the South Sea City, Sister Elugia will blame me to death. Now, the Dalajan was above the sea southwest of the South Sea City, just in time to block Naxxramas from the west. If the Dalajan retreated, then the South Sea City would be exposed to the enemy's attack. When Naxxramas flew above the South Sea City, even if a brick fell from the sky, the unlucky ones would still be the soldiers and civilians of the South Sea City. The Dalajan couldn't retreat. Time passed, and when the two fortresses entered within 5,000 meters, the commanders of both sides ordered at the same time, all magic cannons, prepare to fire. Tension seemed to spread through the nerves of everyone in the central command room at the speed of light. Her facial muscles twitched. Gina swallowed hard, raised a hand, and waved down. Fire. At the same time, Kel Thuzad roared the same order. This time, countless huge black beams of light shot from the fortress towards the sky city of the Dalajan. Similarly, the Dalajan responded with colorful light cannons. Obviously, diverse elemental attacks were more difficult to defend against. And the Dalajan desperately put their shadow protection to the extreme to reduce their losses. The magic shield was not omnipotent. It could withstand the largest and lowest concentration of magic attacks, but it could not produce an effective defense against the penetration of a high concentration of magic beams. A large number of shadow cannons pierced through the shield like sharp needles and shot towards the first row of mage towers on the west side of the Dalajan, causing all kinds of explosions. Small black light bubbles quickly appeared and quickly disappeared. The Dalajan commanders could see this scene on the magic screen. Each shadow light bubble was equivalent to the energy waves caused by several steam tanks exploding at the same time, which meant that in this moment, the Dalajan had also lost hundreds of magic professionals. Chapter 12:26. Arranging counterattacks, arranging for evacuation and treatment of the wounded, and even moving the Dalajan city clockwise so that the mage towers that were not engaged with the enemy could withstand the firepower of Naxxramas. In the Dalajan mage tower, Jaina was racking her brains to deal with this fortress war that no one in this world had ever played before. Fortress against fortress. It sounded exciting, but only after experiencing it personally would one know how cruel this battle was. In just 15 minutes of bombardment, Jaina had already heard no less than 10 familiar names appear on the list of casualties. She clenched her fists tightly, trying hard not to let her voice tremble as she gave clear orders. Originally, this position was not hers. Duque could have completely dominated everything. But Duque gave this opportunity to her, and he even said it very nicely, "My journey is the sea of stars. I'll leave the defense of the floating city to you. This was not only a test of control, but also the cruelest test of her magic control. Because many times, when the magic circuit of the Dalajan city was destroyed or blocked, she even had to personally go to the battlefield to solve it. Manipulating such a huge amount of mana made Jaina feel that something in her body was getting restless. Or rather, her magic circuit that had been sealed for a long time was yearning for a breakthrough, just as the two sky castles beyond the imagination of mortals were firing at full power, bombarding each other non-stop. A cultist messenger of Naxxramas suddenly exclaimed, "Something's approaching us. It's so fast. Not good. There's something above the clouds in the west." "What is it this time?" Kel Thuzad screamed. "I don't know. The turbulence in the clouds affects our perception of soul power," another lich replied. "Shut up, I don't want to hear, I don't know. I want a judgment, even if it's wrong." Kel Thuzad roared a little hysterically. If I have to say what it looks like, it's a battleship." "What? Battleship? The kind of battleship on the sea?" That lich speculated unreliably, then pointed his sharp white finger bone towards the sky. If Kel Thuzad still had a heart, he would have been scared out of his wits. Just above the clouds far to the west of Naxxramas, accompanied by a thunderous noise, a strange existence that could not be seen was breaking through the clouds like the wind and the waves. From afar, it looked like a pot of boiled porridge, but something was coming out of the porridge. As if an invisible giant hand had pulled open the curtains of the dark room, when the clouds were rolling and spreading to the limit, a huge golden eagle head broke out from the clouds. Just right. The clouds dispersed in a split second, and an incomparably bright moonlight shone on the statue of a golden eagle that was the size of a house. What followed was a huge pointed metal head. Not only Naxxramas, but also the officers in the South Sea who were watching through binoculars could guess what it was. It seems that the men my daughter chooses are always capable of doing things that exceed the limits of our imagination. Duke Barav joked that he was already the queen's daughter. "Father." Elucia was embarrassed. As an old noble, as a knowledgeable old man, as the behind-the-scenes ruler of one of the largest ports in the Alliance, and as the operator of the largest maritime caravan in the Alliance, Duke Barav naturally recognized this thing. It was the bow of a ship. The bow of the ship was so exaggerated that he could estimate that what was about to appear from the clouds must be a giant ship. Kul Tira's battleship could not be compared at all. No, even the former flagship of King Delin could not have such a huge and somewhat vulgar bow. This could only be a super warship, and a super warship in the style of the dwarves. But how could the dwarves have a super warship that could fly in the sky? The only answer was that bastard lover Duque, who ate his daughter clean and did not pay for the ticket after boarding the ship. Well, who asked the Barav family to owe this kid Duke so much? The old Duke was already mentally prepared. Even if he had an illegitimate child, he would accept his fate. His gaze returned to the sky. The giant ship made a loud buzzing sound in the clouds as it broke through the clouds. Below the body of the ship, there were 8 tumbling tornadoes. The clouds that were thousands of meters long were pulled by it, as if they were courtiers welcoming the king on an inspection tour. There was not a single sail or mast on the huge body of the ship. The whole ship was like the most primitive river boat that only used paddles as its power source. However, under the so-called waterline, there were not paddles, but 8 huge propellers with diameters of at least 10 meters. The gales they stirred up provided the giant warship with a powerful levitation ability that had 4 decks. At the stern, 2 propellers the size of a steam tank provided the giant ship with unimaginable power to move forward and backward. Looking at the terrifying firepower arrangement of 32 cannons on each deck and 128 cannons on one side, Elucia facepalmed. I finally know what he did with the money I earned. Along with this huge ship, there were 2 smaller frigates that only had 4 propellers and strange sails that appeared in everyone's sight. Although they were the size of a first-level battleship, it was a pity that the first super warship was so huge that it completely overshadowed them. Almost as soon as they arrived, they turned the hull of the ship to form a slope. From afar, it looked like a 3-dimensional cannonball formation. On the flagship, Duque couldn't stop laughing. Ha ha ha. Giant warship. Cannons. This is a man's romance. I don't want to stay in that rigid floating city. Yes. You're absolutely right. Cheers to Skybreaker's first battle. Cheers. Duque suddenly realized that something was wrong. Why the hell are Kudrin, Magni, and Gerben all drinking and toasting? Hey. Who's commanding when you're drunk? I still have you. Magni's, I trust you, look made Duque roll his eyes. Gerben jumped onto the armrest of Duque's seat and patted Duque's shoulder. We've helped you realize your dream. Now, no one has tried to fight a warship in the air. Sir Commander, go ahead and do it. Duque clenched his teeth and looked at the data in the system. In his field of vision, there was a perfect parabola that extended from Skybreaker to Naxxramas after calculating the wind force and direction. Duque waved his hand, and his voice was transmitted to the entire fleet through magic. Wind direction northeast by east, force 3. 3. All cannoneers, pay attention to the simulated parabola. When it coincides with the white cross, press the ready button. Chapter 12:27. In this era, firing a cannon was a skill that required a lot of personal experience. Only Iron Stove Castle, which had more raw materials than they could spend, could afford a group of cannoneers. Iron Stove Castle heard the following dialogue the most: Do you want to have sex tonight? Yes. Let's go to hell. So, it was often two teams of dwarf tank crews who drank a few pounds of wine first, and then, not sleeping in the middle of the night, ran to shoot wolves and rabbits with cannons, causing chaos in the whole of Danma Luo. Well, it was a one-night date, no problem. Not to mention that before Duque's transmigration, dwarves still used thick iron cannons without rifling. Even after Duque introduced the shooting elements and rifling and other concepts, the hit rate of the cannons was still impressive. It couldn't be helped. Before there were computers, in the classic naval battles of the First and Second World Wars on Earth, except for shooting dead targets at close range, the hit rate did not exceed 10%. Those with a hit rate of more than 5% were already called godly cannoneers. No matter how accurate they were, they had to first roughly hit 2 shots, then slowly calibrate, judge the position, direction, and speed of the enemy based on experience, then estimate the advance, and finally fire. As for how accurate they could be, only the heavens knew. After all, at a distance of 3,000 meters, even a large object 100 meters long would not look bigger than a finger to the naked eye. Duque's series of inventions subverted all this. First of all, he attached a high-powered telescope to the front of each cannon. Then the image in the telescope was directly magnified on the 32-inch magic mirror display above the cannon door. Finally, just like playing a game, a dotted line was marked on the display. That was the simulated arc of the cannonball after setting the shooting elements. As long as the barrel was adjusted to coincide with the dotted line, then it would basically hit. When Duque's invention came out, it once again changed the entire war. It wasn't that the old cannoneers couldn't do it. With the help of the new system, they shot more accurately and fiercely, but the standard of qualified cannoneers had been easily lowered. New cannoneers only needed to go through 3 months of training to easily hit more than 50% of a fixed target with a diameter of 50 meters at a distance of 2,000 meters. Now, the target was the huge floating fortress Naxxramas, which was measured in units of length and width in units of 1,000 meters. Even from 3,000 meters away, it couldn't be easier. All right. I'll leave the first shot to you. Magni raised his glass high into the air. Duque pursed his lips, but he still raised his hand high. All fleets, listen up. Fire 3 consecutive shots. Afterwards, the Heaven Destroyer will move in a serpentine fashion, the Black Pearl will rudder fully to the left, the Flying Dutchman will rudder fully to the right, pull the formation apart. As Duque's right hand chopped down fiercely, the entire Heaven Breaker began to fire its cannons from the bow. Bang! 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 At first, it sounded like muffled thunder coming from the horizon, but when the sound of the cannons became like firecrackers, from the bow of the ship to the stern of the ship that was 3 stories high, Duque still felt a little unbearable from the violent tremors that came from the hull of the ship even though they had set up a soundproof spell in advance. Ugh! This super heaven breaker was clearly many times more powerful than the original version, and it had the typical bulky dwarven style. Every 155mm cannon had rifling, as well as a hydraulic and pneumatic recoil mechanism that was equivalent to Earth's World War II, to reduce the recoil. However, when the 128 cannons opened fire in succession, the powerful recoil still caused the entire heaven breaker to shift at least 50 meters to the left in midair. Including the 2 battleships, the 3 giant ships had a total of more than 200 cannons roaring in unison. It was a spectacular scene. Even if the chief high priest of the goddess of the moon, Tyrant, had personally activated Starfall, it wouldn't have such a scene. From the perspective of the soldiers and civilians below, as soon as the 3 giant ships charged out of the roiling dark clouds, the sides of the ship suddenly flickered with a blinding light, followed by an incomparably frightening death cry that could be heard clearly even from 10,000 meters away. When the cannonballs filled with the will of destruction crossed a distance of 3,000 meters, they ruthlessly smashed into the outer walls of Naxxramas. Explosions and flames immediately appeared continuously on this fortress that was brimming with the aura of sin. The fortress was on fire, but the fire wasn't too big. But flames were definitely not a good thing for this fortress full of undead. Kel Thuzad was so angry on the spot. What's going on? What's going on? Where did the Alliance get a flying control warship? Could it be that Archimonde, that trash, died on Mount Hyjal and even lost his void warship? The roar of the Great Lich was destined to be meaningless. Duque, while confirming the results of the battle and the point of impact through his binoculars, seemed to mutter to himself, "It seems that Naxxramas really can't stop the cannonballs. As staunch supporters of giant ships and cannons, how could the dwarves' cannons only be 155mm so weak?" Those 155mm rapid-fire cannons were also used for suppressive fire and anti-aircraft purposes. At the same time, they could also test whether Naxxramas' magic protection system was still effective. After all, nowadays, even the great villains had learned to put a cannonball protection spell on the city walls and fortresses. The real killer weapon was, of course, the 3 triple turrets that Duque had installed on the ship. The caliber wasn't much, just a mere 460mm. To the crazy dwarves, they even thought that the caliber was too small. It was just that the craftsmanship wasn't up to standard, and the recoil was too crazy. If they wanted to install it on a flying warship, this was already the limit. It wasn't that they didn't have cannons with a larger caliber, but the problem was that the ship's keel couldn't take it. Magni could only reluctantly agree to install the 460mm triple turrets. When Duque ordered the main cannons to open fire, in just 3 or 4 breaths' time, a deafening roar came from the heaven breaker. That was the roar of the main cannons firing at full power. 1, 2, 3, 9. A total of 9 golden beams of light pierced into the dark and evil giant fortress like sharp blades. The hard outer layer of the fortress took most of the damage from the previous bombardment. This time, facing the bombardment of the 460mm giant cannons, the outer layer of the fortress that had been ravaged time and time again finally couldn't take it anymore and exploded. Previously, they were still worried that the Alliance would send troops to land, so Kel Thuzad sent a large number of undead creatures to the outer layer of the fortress. In the end, these undead were all unlucky. Skeleton soldiers, flesh structures, and the like were instantly blown into pieces, flesh flying everywhere. The gargoyles that were just about to attack were easily pierced through by the gravel from the explosion or directly through their bodies. They screamed and howled as they fell from the sky. The huge abominations were blown into rotten tomatoes, and dirty blood rained down. Kel Thuzad had been saving up for many years, preparing to use the undead army to conquer the entire world of Azeroth. In front of the terrifying cannon fire, they painfully and helplessly walked into the abyss of destruction. Duque couldn't stop laughing. Fire the cannons, fire the cannons, fire the cannons. Fire all the cannons. Blast them. Chapter 1228. The great Lich King is the sky of this world. He is the land of this world. Everything in this world will eventually return to the embrace of death. Death is your only home. During the time when Naxxramas was wreaking havoc on the land, the power of the cult of the damned once again rose, seducing many people with weak wills into the cult. Seeing the terrifying fortress in the sky that no one could keep in check, many people were in despair. They joined the cult of the damned as lowly people and became the slaves of the Lich King as living people. However, would they regret what they saw today? At this moment, the Dalajan city had already turned almost half a circle clockwise. After removing the illusion in front of him, Thuzad was about to go crazy. This was because, to the north of the sky city of the Dalajan, there was something completely different. More than 3,000 large cannons were arranged according to the slope of the sky city, as dense as a primeval forest. These terrifying steel creations had nothing to do with the magic capital of the Dalajan. This was the most surprising thing. It was only at this moment that Thuzad understood that everything was a trap. First, they used the Dalajan's magic to deceive the Scourge army into turning all their defenses to the magic side. Then, they forcefully broke the shield and switched to downright physical attacks. This series of tricks completely trapped the Scourge army. The dignified Sky City, of course, couldn't just install something as soft as 460mm cannons. Since there was Duque, the commander of the Alliance and the temporary chairman of Kirin Tor, naturally, no one would have the ability to oppose the dwarves' cannons being stationed here. 3,600mm cannons, this was the ultimate answer that the dwarves handed over. This was an upgraded version 7.0 based on the small steel cannon from the second final battle at the Dark Portal. It could be said to have no limits, and the thickness of the barrel alone was more than 1 meter. The entire barrel was 25 meters long, and the total combat weight of the cannon exceeded 100 tons. Because the barrel was too simple and violent, and the size and weight of the shell was too terrifying, there was no way to install a brake. As a result, in order to prevent the ground from collapsing, they had no choice but to install a floating magic circle and a water elemental mount that was similar to a hydraulic device under the base of the cannon. Fire the cannons, blast his mother. For a moment, Thuzad felt that something was wrong. He directly teleported outside the fortress and activated cannonball protection, using his Breaking Dawn magic power to deflect most of the cannonballs. Unfortunately, there were just too many of them. The trajectories of the bullets were strange, and they flew in all directions. Some of them fell into the sea on their own, creating a terrifying water column that was more than 10 meters tall. Sometimes, if you blocked it, it would be extremely metaphysically tilted to the side and explode on top of Naxxramas. When a mortar shell weighing more than 4 tons hit Naxxramas, it gave the undead only one feeling: the sky was falling and the earth was cracking. Under the fearful gazes of all the undying, the black speck flying out from the Dalajan was rapidly growing in size. It easily blasted through the thick outer walls of the fortress, smashing through the layers made of solid stone. After going through more than 10 layers, it let out an unstoppable explosion. In every room, in every hall, the undead creatures on the floor slid down as the floor collapsed. The unlucky ones on the lower floors fell directly into the sea. The entire fortress shook violently. Black Witch Farina, who had been trying hard to maintain her noble and elegant temperament, screamed as she was thrown out by the violent impact. Although her magic shield protected her well, the powerful impact still made her dizzy. Just as she tried to stand up, she was affected by a new round of impact. Just an inch away from hitting her forehead on the wall. Ouch! She flailed her arms and legs, trying to grab something. In the end, she grabbed a broken skeletal arm that belonged to some low-level lich. She screamed and threw the arm away in disgust. In the fortress, almost everyone was trying to grab the nearest fixed object that they could reach, but this was of no help to the situation of the fortress. There were buildings and rooms that were completely torn apart after the explosions. The bricks that were covered in magic imprints, the rotten wooden boards, the beams that were engraved with evil runes, and the meaningless dust all collapsed at the same time, turning into mud and debris that fell into the sea. Everyone could see that if this continued, the greatest floating fortress of the Calamity Army would soon become a pile of ruins and fall on the shore of the endless ocean. Saffron. Kel-Thuzad couldn't take it anymore. He summoned his strongest fighter, the frost dragon Saffron, who had been a powerful blue dragon in life. He needed a vanguard to open the way for Naxxramas to hit the Dalajan. The huge frost dragon flew out with dozens of its minions and hundreds of gargoyles. However, they didn't fly far before they met their opponent. "Hey! Mount, it's time to work." Duque sent a magic message. "Humph. You call me Oni when you're happy." The Black Dragon Princess complained in the secret channel. Duque's face was a little dark. "Stop talking nonsense and get to work." "Got it. Got it." With Onyxia in the lead, more than a dozen Alliance powerhouses rode pure-blooded firehawks, along with more than 3,000 Griffin Knights and Dragon Hawk Knights, swooping down from the clouds and fighting with Saffron and the Scourge Army. The Scourge Army was stunned. Kel-Thuzad could see clearly that the Alliance had almost calculated all the responses of the Scourge Army. If this continued, Naxxramas could only walk on the road of destruction. No. It shouldn't be like this. The Great Lich finally panicked. As Naxxramas got closer to the Dalajan, the terrifying giant mortars became more and more accurate. The hit rate of that thing 3 kilometers away was terrible, but the closer it was, the more terrifying it was. "Sir. The military area has been severely damaged. Instructor Resuvius and his Death Knight apprentices have fallen into the sea. The structure area has been destroyed, Globulus has been destroyed. Sir. Please instruct." In the spiritual connection circuit of the dead, there were cries of despair everywhere. In the sky, the roars of the dwarves and the war songs of the blood elves echoed everywhere. These former high elves did not forget what the undead scourge had done in the Long Song Forest and Silvermoon City. Under the leadership of the Ranger General Sasha, they sang the war songs that had been widely spread when the Troll Empire was still wreaking havoc in the Lordaeron continent. Dragon hawks spread their wings, bows and arrows raised high, destroy evil, protect our forest. They, or their predecessors, had sung the same war song when they fought alongside the humans 2,800 years ago. 2,800 years later, when this sacred and ancient song was sung, it once again reminded people of that sacred and solemn oath. In the blink of an eye, 3,000 years had passed, and more races had joined the war against evil. Chapter 12:29. The sky-breaking plan was to break the rule of evil in the sky. Whether it was humans, elves, or the major races of the Alliance and Horde, none of them had the ability to soar in the sky. Over the past few days, the evil fortress of the undead, Naxxramas, had been harassing them like flies. If they were strong, they would be harassed. If they were weak, they would be destroyed. Which race, which kingdom, which clan did not have a stomach full of anger? The rice in the farmland was once again infected by the plague, the green trees in the forest withered, and even many herbivorous animals like rabbits began to bite people. This hatred had been thoroughly vented on Naxxramas today. Fire. 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 Don't worry about whether or not the cannons will explode. If the cannons don't explode, it means that you are slacking off. Bulang Bronzebeard personally commanded the cannons on the Dalajan city wall. Even in the middle of the night, everyone could see that the evil floating fortress was on the verge of collapse. Retreat. Kel-Thuzad had no choice but to give such an order. If Naxxramas was in perfect condition, of course, it would not be afraid of this level of cannons. The problem was that the first shot of the Dalajan main cannon had already destroyed Naxxramas' strongest magical defense system. More than half of the 36 psychic magic circles that acted as nodes had collapsed. To regroup was not something that could be done in a month or half a season. If they did not retreat, the mobile fortress that the Lich King had given him would be destroyed here. Just a moment ago, Naxxramas was rushing towards the Dalajan, and the Dalajan was slowly retreating, trying to sink the fortress with fierce artillery fire before Naxxramas could rush over. The next moment, everyone found that this extremely large floating fortress had begun to turn. Trying to run? Any commander with a bit of brain realized that Kel Thuzad was going to run. Duque stood up from the commander's seat. Magni. The first goal has been achieved. The rest is up to you. Although Magni was prepared, he was still a little stunned. Must you, the commander of the Alliance, personally take the risk? Duque smiled. There are some things that only I can do. And my woman is trapped. If I don't save her, who will? Duque's words undoubtedly confirmed the gossip he had with Sylvanas and Tyrande. Of course, the dwarves did not care about this at all. Be careful. Cutran attacked, and Magni and Gerben warned Duque at the same time. Duque smiled, don't worry, Amir Kel Thuzad can't stop me. Every powerhouse had their own mission. When Magni took over the Heavenbreaker, the entire fleet's combat style changed. Sexy. Indescribably coquettish. The three ships each went their own way. The Flying Dutchman moved in an S shape, the Heavenbreaker relied on its powerful magic defense and extremely thick armor plates to move in a straight one shape, and the Black Pearl moved in a three shape to harass them. The air fleet pulled away from Naxxramas and only dealt with the air fortress with guerrilla warfare. If the air fleet fought with Naxxramas, Kel Thuzad would definitely take down the Alliance's airships first. Now it was guerrilla warfare, and the Dalajan was still chasing him. Even if he used his withered toes to think, he knew that if Naxxramas went on like this, it would definitely not be able to survive the endless sea. Falling into the sea and being destroyed was the only ending. Kel Thuzad did not want to fall into the sea. It was said that it was the territory of En-Zoth, the most troublesome of the ancient gods of Azeroth. Returning to the command center, Kel Thuzad's eyes glowed red. Everyone get ready. We are going to carry out the Chilling Wind plan. When Kel Thuzad said this name, all his subordinates were stunned. At this moment, Duque used magic to contact Sar. In the magic mirror, the young chief looked a lot older. He was clearly in his early 20s, but Duque saw that there were a few strands of white hair on Sar's temples. I heard from Grom about the success of Blackwing's nest. First of all, thank you for the help you provided to the tribe. This time, we successfully killed the traitor. On behalf of the tribe, I express my highest gratitude to the Alliance. What's the matter now? Sar bowed to Duque. About your request for help from the Alliance is finally willing to send troops. Although Sar tried to suppress his emotions, his eyes were filled with desire. This was not his fault. The insect army that poured out of Karaj and Silithus was too terrifying. Even if the hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians of the tribe worked together to fight, they were unable to fight against this terrifying insect tide. In addition, Naxxramas had wreaked havoc, sweeping through the main cities of almost every race in the tribe. This further dampened the will of the tribe's people to fight. It was no exaggeration to say that the Alliance was the tribe's only hope. Unfortunately, what Sar saw was Duque shaking his head. Before the Alliance takes care of the Amani trolls and the trolls who believe in the evil god Hacker, the Alliance is unable to go on an expedition to Kalimdor. No, even if it's just the Theramore army and the Night Elves, seeing that the tribe has been cooperating with the Alliance in battle since their rebirth. Sar still wanted to play the emotional card. Duque shook his head firmly. Sar's body trembled, and his eyes dimmed. Then, is there anything else? If there isn't. At this time, Duque showed a naughty expression. Even if the Alliance doesn't send troops, it doesn't mean that there is no way to solve the problem of Silithus. Huh. Sar's expression was very interesting. When he heard what Duque said, his expression became even more interesting. A few minutes later, Naxxramas. Although someone once said that explosions were art, the guy who was treated as a work of art was not having a good time at the moment. There were explosions everywhere, choking smoke filled the eyes, and there was a turbulent flow of magic elements. Be careful of the Alliance's surprise attack. If you find anyone from the Alliance, report immediately. All cursed disciples, take off your hoods and accept inspection. It had to be said that Kel Thuzad was very careful. If anyone was really so daring as to put on the black robe of the cursed sect and take the opportunity to sneak in, then they would definitely die a terrible death. However, no one would pay attention to a low-level lich like Anad. Just like that, Anad, who had appeared out of nowhere, went straight in. From the outer area, he passed through half of the military area. From time to time, he would grab one or two liches to ask for directions, and he arrived at the core of Naxxramas. In the middle of 4 huge pillars carved with the statue of Lich King Arthas, there was a green portal. 2 liches, 4 death knights, and 24 powerful abominations guarded the portal without moving an inch. No matter how chaotic the outside world was, no matter how many undead monsters fled in panic, no monster would be stupid enough to approach this place. This was an absolute forbidden area. Suddenly, they saw Kel Thuzad coming over. Chapter 1230. Sir. Why are you here? The leading lich was very surprised by Kel Thuzad's appearance. In his imagination, a big shot like Kel Thuzad should be sitting in the central core. Why would he come here? Do I need you to ask about my affairs? The red light in Kel Thuzad's eyes flourished, and dense breaking dawn mana undulations filled with a frosty aura surged slightly, almost causing this radiant moon lich's soul to become unstable from the pressure. Yes, yes, yes. The liches and death knights didn't even dare to fart, and immediately retreated to the side. Kel Thuzad floated over. What made them a little puzzled was why Kel Thuzad seemed to take a few seconds longer to open the portal this time. In the past, he would enter instantly. But the white teleportation light lit up, so there was nothing else for them to do. Kel Thuzad immediately teleported from Naxxramas to a different space. Strictly speaking, this was not the interior of Naxxramas, but it was still a special space attached to Naxxramas' existence. Everywhere he looked, there was a frosty aura. The huge steps of the palace were covered with icicles, and ordinary people would slip if they were not careful. Of course, for a top lich who floated around all year round, slipping was just a joke. This was the lair of the frost dragon Sapphiron. Although the blue dragon Sapphiron had been dead for many years, as a dragon, his habit of guarding his lair had not disappeared. As long as he was here, he was the most reliable guard. It seemed that because of Sapphiron's attack, Kel Thuzad had no choice but to rush over. Because next to the dragon's lair, there were 2 leaders of the alliance sealed and imprisoned by a powerful magic formation, the Queen of Sin Dorii, Sylvanas, and the Night Elf High Priest, Tyrande. These 2 stunning beauties were still cuddling and hugging each other as if they had just been captured. 2 beautiful faces were so close to each other, it was a pity that they were hibernating. Kel Thuzad quickly dispelled the magic formation made up of more than 100,000 magic runes and went through it. Then, one of his huge claws passed through Alun's milky white moonlight protection without any hindrance, and he placed his other hand on Sylvanas' fair, slender, and well-rounded leg, and started caressing it. Tyrande was the first to wake up. Ah! Kel Thuzad, you actually. She was trembling. She never thought that Kel Thuzad would be able to break through the goddess defense, but it was so easily broken through. In that case, wouldn't it mean that they would be killed and turned into terrifying banshees of death? The evil will would control them. Even if they could resist Kel Thuzad's mind control like Uther, they would still be separated from Duque by life and death. For their own race, for their own people, they were not afraid of death. However, Tyrande could not bear to part with Duque forever. This scene almost caused Tyrande to collapse. She knew that here, the power of the moon goddess was extremely thin. 100 units of the power of the moon only filled her body with 1% of it. However, at the most critical moment of her life, Tyrande did not hesitate to chant an incantation and find a way to move her body, which was already weak from hunger, to attack Kel Thuzad. Rangers and priests were not good at close combat, but liches who were born as mages were even worse. This was Tyrande's last desperate attempt. Just as she was about to stab Kel Thuzad's head with her dagger, an even more unexpected scene appeared. At the same time, another Kel Thuzad appeared at the gate that Kel Thuzad had entered. Ah! Tyrande let out a cry of surprise, and her already slow movements became even slower. 2 Kel Thuzads. What the hell was this? Not only was Tyrant shocked, even Kel Thuzad at the door was shocked. He also did not expect that there would be an identical version of himself here. Whether it was appearance, aura, or even magic and soul fluctuations, they were all exactly the same. How was this possible? He subconsciously asked, "Who are you?" "Me? Of course I am Kel Thuzad." With his back facing the door, Kel Thuzad, who was touching Queen Sylvanas' thigh, flashed to the other side and shamelessly used his other claw to grab Tyron's Mount Hygel. This action caused Tyron to let out a cry of surprise. Suddenly, Sylvanas slowly woke up and said, "What are you screaming for? If it's not that perverted Duque, would a lich without that thing touch us like this?" Tyron was stunned. After the shock, she suddenly realized that this technique was very familiar. And that touch, it was definitely not Bones. In the next moment, the lich who was hugging the two women, who should have been Bones, began to remove his illusion disguise, revealing a dirty Duque. Duque completely ignored Kel Thuzad and turned to Queen Sylvanas, asking seriously, "How do you know it's me?" The weak Queen Sylvanas rolled her eyes at Duque. "Who else would come up and touch my leg besides you?" "Good answer. I didn't dote on you in vain." Duque lecherously kissed Queen Sylvanas. At the side, Tyrande was both happy and shocked. She had originally wanted to kiss Duque, but thinking of the strong enemies around, her clear eyes inevitably clouded over. "Duque, you shouldn't have come." "Then I did. Are you happy?" Duque smiled cheekily. "I am happy, but," without another word, Duque kissed her back. At this time, Kel Thuzad, who was at the door, could not help but let out a sneer like a night owl. Hee, she's right, you shouldn't have come. I thought this was the day of the Scourge's setback, but in the end, we still won. Hee. As long as I kill you. The great Lich King would gain yet another powerful Lich subordinate. And 2 not bad banshees. Ha 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 ha. Kel Thuzad's words caused Tyrande to tremble a little. Strangely, Sylvanas was indifferent. Tyrande suddenly realized this, and immediately understood. She allowed Duque's big hand to continue doing evil. Because it was time for Duque to perform. Sure enough, Duque faced the sky at a 45-degree angle, showing Kel Thuzad his 2 big nostrils. Then, as expected, he snorted. "Humph. Fool, do you really think that just because I came to your stronghold, you'll be able to defeat me? You plot against my subordinates and women, and I'm also plotting against you. Perhaps, in terms of undead magic, I'm not as good as you, but in terms of spatial magic, you're not even worthy of carrying my shoes." Chapter 1231. Duque's words immediately reminded Kel Thuzad of something bad. But as soon as he finished speaking, the entire fortress shook violently. Without giving Kel Thuzad a chance to react, the next moment, the entire Naxxramas began to teleport. Outside, when the frost dragon Sapphiron began to withdraw, the Alliance felt that something was wrong. Now that they suddenly saw a huge portal halo covering Naxxramas, the Alliance warriors were in an uproar. "Charge! Catch up! Don't let these undead monsters get away! Fire, fire! Where's the Dalajan? What are you doing? Fire another shot at this floating tomb!" There were curses everywhere, and the entire Alliance's magic communication network was full of calls to the top to find a way to keep Naxxramas. Everyone was holding their breaths. Now that they had finally formed a siege, and the Alliance had the upper hand, they actually saw a cooked duck about to fly away. Who could bear this? At this moment, 3 signal flares suddenly rose above the Dalajan. They spread out in a circle at a higher altitude, accompanied by a special light effect. It was very beautiful, red, yellow, and blue. "This is the retreat signal." Every dwarf griffin knight and elf dragon hawk knight were dumbfounded when they saw this signal. Not only the Dalajan, but on the Skybreaker, the same signal flares rose. It was actually a unanimous order from the Alliance's top brass to retreat. No matter how unwilling they were, since they wore the badge of the Alliance, they were soldiers of the Alliance, and the orders of the Alliance military were absolute. If they disobeyed orders, even their own king could not protect them. On the first day of joining the Alliance army, every soldier was repeatedly told and emphasized this point by their country's generals. The Alliance Air Force reluctantly retreated. Not only the Air Force, but the Dalajan was also in an uproar. A large number of mid-level and high-level mages surrounded the headquarters, demanding an explanation from Jaina. Why did you give up the pursuit? We should have let the Dalajan crash and fight those disgusting undead monsters. Under the turbulence of the crowd, Jaina's voice was almost drowned out. Everyone was talking at once. No, it was simply 3,000 ducks making a fuss. Jaina was getting more and more frustrated and furious. She had wanted to persuade these hot-headed fellows, but these fellows who had forcefully advanced to the Radiant Moon realm had the nerve to point their fingers at her, almost poking her face. Gianna was very unhappy. Wasn't this a slap in the face? No. This was already trampling on the field, rubbing Gianna's face against the ground. These fellows took advantage of the fact that this was a Dalajan that only looked at magic power levels and ignored her status as a queen, putting themselves in the realm of magic and thinking that they could reason with her as equals. Suddenly, he felt indignant. As the disciple and partner of the most powerful wizard, Duke Marcus, Jaina was under a lot of pressure. Especially after Luo Ning became a Breaking Dawn Great Wizard, she felt even more pressure. Although she was younger than Luo Ning, she had already reached the peak of a Radiant Moon Mage in terms of physique, intelligence, experience, and even accumulation. However, she just couldn't cross that final threshold. Luo Ning had been lost in a different dimension, and Duque had become the chairman of the Kirin Tour. No one had any objections. Many Radiant Moon mages were unhappy that Duque had left the Dalajan in Jaina's hands. This directly led to the current scene of everyone berating her. Depressing. Accumulating anger. Then, Jaina suddenly thought it through. Without any warning, a powerful aura of ice suddenly blossomed in the Wizard Tower's command center. This aura was so pure, so oppressive. Even if the essence of this power was ice, it was as eye-catching as a lighthouse in the dark. The command center, which had been in chaos just a moment ago, suddenly became deathly silent. For wizards, the difference between each rank was like the difference between heaven and earth. In every era, there were thousands of wizards who were stuck at the threshold of advancing, unable to advance their entire lives. This was especially so for Breaking Dawn. In the Dalajan's 2,800 years of history, there had been no Breaking Dawn wizard presiding over half of it. At first, there was Antonidas, then Duque, and then Luo Ning, who had inherited Duque's legacy. They had thought that the Dalajan was already lucky enough. Who would have thought that at this seemingly random moment, there would be another Breaking Dawn wizard? Sir Proudmoore. You become a Breaking Dawn wizard? Great Astromancer Solarian asked cautiously in a soft voice. Yes, that's right. Jaina was in high spirits. She flung her long golden hair, looking very confident. You. How did you advance? It's nothing. I suddenly thought it through and advanced. Jaina said it lightly. In fact, the most important thing was that Duque had let her take charge of the Dalajan's main magic cannon. While she was controlling the terrifying magic cannon, she gained unimaginable experience in terms of understanding and manipulation of magic power. This was the key to her advancement. However, she still felt a little regretful. This was because she had used her understanding of the arcane element on her frost element. She had advanced to Breaking Dawn as an ice wizard, unlike Duque who had advanced with all his elements. She was single-minded, while Duque was single-minded and all-round. In the future, she would definitely not be able to match up to Duque. Of course, this was enough to make everyone around her jealous. Those who had dared to reprimand Jaina just a moment ago were now as quiet as cicadas in winter. They were afraid that Jaina would remember them and make things difficult for them if they breathed too loudly. A Breaking Dawn wizard. Just thinking about it made them wet their pants. As a queen, she naturally had the aura of a queen. Jaina waved her lily-white hands. As a commander, if you can't even maintain basic calmness, how can you get your subordinates to fight calmly? Will everyone be hot-blooded, then fall into the Calamity Army's trap and die, becoming Arthas slaves? Jaina's words implied that these fellows had no talent. Fine. Those fellows who had wanted to gain some popularity would never be able to stay in the Kirin Tor parliament for the rest of their lives. After scolding her subordinates, Jaina said, "All of this is part of the Alliance's plan. We are going to run to Naxxramas. As for where to go, everyone will know soon enough." In Naxxramas, Kel Thuzad was going crazy. His so-called Cold Wind plan was the top secret of Naxxramas. If Naxxramas could not hold on, it would activate the power left by His Majesty the Lich King and teleport the entire stronghold to Northren's Icecrown Fortress through the predetermined space coordinates. But now that the teleportation was over, Duque and the other two had run away. The stronghold had somehow lost its ability to float and began to fall at high speed. Through the magic mirror, Kel Thuzad saw the yellow sand outside. In this life, almost all of the major evil factions rose up together, and the Alliance army was trapped in the Eastern Kingdom. Although the Dragon Slumber Shrine wanted to organize the mortals to encircle and annihilate Kiraj of Silithus, they were powerless. In order to maintain the front line outside of Azeroth's atmosphere, the Dragon's Rest Temple couldn't deploy too many troops. The dragon breaths of dozens of giant dragons and more than 200 adult dragons were not enough to clear away the overwhelming number of insects, most of which were flying insects. Coupled with the disappearance of the Night Elf High Priestess Tyrande, the Alliance didn't announce that she had been captured. The Night Elf army that the Horde had been hoping for didn't move at all. The result was that the situation in Kiraj was getting worse. Alexstrasza, who had just bitten off a Void Lord's head, suddenly received a message. What? He's helping me control Kiraj? He finally dealt with Nefarian and is ready to lead the army across the sea? No, the Alliance didn't actually send the army across the sea because they still have to deal with the Amani trolls and Hacker, Krasis said bitterly. Then why did he help me deal with Kiraj? The Red Dragon Queen was shocked. If someone else said this to her, she might have already taught him a lesson with her dragon breath. He said, he wants you to watch the movie of the year, Fall of Naxxramas. Huh? Alexstrasza excitedly rushed back to the floating fortress outside the atmosphere. This was the great creation left behind by the Titans. Through the magic mirror in the fortress, she saw a scene that left her dumbfounded. It wasn't just her. Everyone who saw this scene was so shocked that their jaws almost dropped to the ground. In the Dalajan, through the magician's eye, Duque had his left arm around Sylvanas' shoulder and his right arm around Tyran's slender waist. All that was left was popcorn and cola. He watched this scene with satisfaction. They had successfully escaped and returned. Even so, Queen Sylvanas felt her heart beating wildly when she thought back to what had just happened. Duque, how did you do it? You disguised yourself as Kel Thuzad and snuck in, then saved us. Even though she did not want to admit that her lover was so powerful, the proud Queen Sylvanas could not help but look at him with admiration. This made Duque feel very good. Tyran's long fingers seemed to wander around on Duque's chest. Did you forget that this guy disguised himself as a Void Lord in the War of the Ancients? Duque is very good at infiltrating the enemy's territory too. He even took me for himself. Duque felt wronged. Hey, if I didn't help you back then, you would have become the devil's plaything. Yes, yes, yes. When I recover my strength, I will repay you. Tyrande replied with a flirtatious look. Actually, Duque's infiltration was not worth a damn. Since he could disguise himself as a Void Lord back then, his control of dark energy was naturally very good. As the Scourge was born from the Burning Legion, the nature of their power was the same. Before Arthas, who was disguised as the Lich King, woke up, nothing could be changed. What happened next was simple. Duque first killed a Lich, then used the dark energy of the Shadow Element, the soul manipulation ability he learned from the Burning Legion, and the true illusion created by the system elf to fool the bones on the periphery. Next, he used the illusion to disguise himself as Kel Thuzad and used the system to crack the magic defense system that was too shallow for him. If he had to pretend to be a Death Knight, he would most likely be exposed. But pretending to be Kel Thuzad, who was born as a mage, was simply too easy. The only problem was that Duque could not escape the senses of the frost dragon, Sapphiron. But after forcing Sapphiron to make a move, everything was solved. As a transmigrator, Duque was very clear about Naxxrama's teleportation ability. Although this would cost Naxxramas a lot of magic, the magic was not his, so what did it have to do with him? Naxxramas would be fine if he did not teleport, but once he did, because someone had secretly changed the spatial coordinates, he was directly sent to Karaj. Chapter 1233. This day was the day of suffering for the Karaj insect people. What was supposed to be a good hunt turned into a disaster. In the sky above the Karaj temple, an incomparably huge man-made object passed through the void and appeared above the temple. For the insect people, this was not a pleasant thing. Because as soon as this huge sky fortress appeared, the sky was filled with dust, broken tiles, and huge broken pieces of buildings that fell from the sky like rain. When the huge fortress completely appeared in the sky, it almost covered half of the Karaj temple. What made the insect people even more infuriated was the enemy's provocative airborne attack. A large number of undead fell from the sky. As long as they didn't fall into meat paste, even if they only had half of their bodies left, even if they dragged their spines, the zombies would still wildly attack all living things. Their targets naturally included the giant beetles. These strange insects with 4 legs, angular bodies, and mouths like scythes were actually the Vecnus warriors of the Karaj insect people. The Vecnus warriors were quite large. Every insect warrior was the size of a small car that Dubo had used before he transmigrated. Perhaps 100 zombies wouldn't be able to kill a Vecnus warrior, but as long as they surrounded and killed an insect, that insect would quickly turn into a zombie and attack its former companions. This easily angered the insect people's commander. They immediately sent out giant dog-headed guards that were as tall as a 10-story building, the Anubis Sentinels. In contrast, other large undead creatures began to fall from the sky, such as abominations and the even more exaggerated stitched behemoths. They also angrily attacked the Anubisath warriors. As a result, the battle began to escalate before the leaders of both sides could stop it. In fact, if anyone could control their own soldiers, they would know that this was a misunderstanding. Unfortunately, none of the leaders had the luxury to do so. On Karaj's side, most of the leaders were in deep sleep. On Naxxramas's side, the aftermath of the explosion didn't stop with the teleportation. In other words, it was because of the teleportation that it intensified. This was an incomplete teleportation. No normal teleportation would be so messy. At the moment of teleportation, 2 different coordinates would be used. The result was that the teleportation encountered a terrifying spatial crack. The leader of the construction area, Glass, is severely damaged. Only half of his body is left. He can't fight. The levitation system has failed. We're falling. The voice of the cursing disciple sorcerer who was in charge of making the report reminded the other undying of the screams of a chicken before it was slaughtered. Reboot the system. Kel Thuzad shouted as he rushed back. No. There's no response. Something seems to be blocking the soul transmission. Kel Thuzad personally rushed over and directly invaded the control circuit with his spirit. Almost instantly, he discovered that the originally unimpeded soul control system had been tampered with. In the suspension system, there was a powerful will that was no less powerful than is entangled there. The entire stronghold was falling, but the willpower was too strong for him to forcefully unlock it. He could only try to touch it and see what kind of encryption or puzzle lock it was. Excuse me, what is 1 + 1? In Kel Thuzad's sea of consciousness, Duque's voice, which he hated to the extreme, sounded frivolous, too. Kel Thuzad did not hesitate. Wrong. If you put 1 and 1 together, it's obviously 11. The will left behind by a certain person was acting shamelessly. Kel Thuzad didn't give up and tried again. Excuse me, what is 1 plus 1? Duque's voice was full of seriousness. 11, Kel Thuzad answered decisively. Wrong. The first time I asked you, I was teasing you. The second time, didn't you notice that I was using a serious tone? Kel Thuzad suddenly wanted to kill someone. Again. Excuse me, what is 1 plus 1? Kel Thuzad noticed that Duque's voice was as serious as the second time. So he answered decisively, 2. Correct, please use Goldbach's conjecture to prove it. This time, Kel Thuzad went berserk. Prove your sister. What is Goldbach's conjecture? What the hell is this? You're clearly playing with me. As if to confirm Kel Thuzad's thoughts, Duque's voice appeared again, full of ridicule. Yes. I'm playing with you, so what? Bite me if you're not convinced? Without any explanation, Duque's will that was left in the control center suddenly launched a terrifying mental attack on Kel Thuzad. Gathering together, it was a mind blast that went straight into Kel Thuzad's mind. Woo! They were both breaking dawns, so even if there was a difference, it was not necessarily a difference of heaven and earth. Of course, a remnant will could not do anything to Kel Thuzad. Delaying for time was not a problem. In the real world outside, a group of undyings waited for Kel Thuzad's instructions. In the end, Kel Thuzad fell into a strange state of silence. They could only try to save the rapidly falling floating fortress by themselves. No. At least send out the Air Force. Open up the gargoyle's attack path. Black Witch Farina screamed. Perhaps what she did was right. However, under the acceleration of gravity, a huge fortress weighing tens of thousands of tons suddenly fell from a height of 1,000 meters. This was no different from throwing a terrifying tactical nuclear bomb equivalent to 10,000 tons of TNT on top of the Kiraj temple. The top of the huge temple, which was full of reliefs, was completely torn apart with a sharp roar. The bricks and pillars that had stood tall in the desert of Silithus for who knew how many centuries broke and collapsed one after another. They fell to the ground and were crushed into powder by an even stronger impact. The Kiraj temple, the superstructure that had imprisoned the ancient god Cyclone for more than 25,000 years, turned into ruins in a matter of seconds. The impact stirred up sand and dust, covering the entire sky of Silithus. Amidst the shattered stone shards, there were also countless insect limbs. After an unknown amount of time, the dust that had been stirred up finally settled down. When the dragons and other forces used their telescopic magic to spy on the area, they found that the Kiraj temple had disappeared. In its place was only half of Naxxrama's. Of course, this was not the end. This was because the core of the Kiraj temple was not on the surface at all. Stimulated, countless beetle guards rushed out from every corner of the temple, madly crawling towards the undead fortress that had destroyed their holy land. Similarly, as long as it was an undead creature with a relatively intact body, they mercilessly fought against the incoming beetles. An earth-shaking uproar followed. Whether Kel Thuzad and Cyclone were willing or not, they had no choice but to become mortal enemies and had to fight until only one side was left. Chapter 1234. In the Magic Mirror's live broadcast, the Scourge Army and the Kiraj insect people were fighting non-stop. Every moment, there were hundreds and thousands of undead or Kiraj insect people being destroyed. If it was somewhere else, Kel Thuzad might have jumped up in joy. With so many corpses, it was enough for him to pull out a terrifying undead army that could sweep across half the continent. Obviously, Cyclone, who was in the deepest part of the ruins of the Kiraj temple, would not let Kel Thuzad do as he pleased. At first, there were many insects that were killed and resurrected as corpse insects, devouring their own kind. In addition, the fighting style of the insects was to bite one of their legs and bite one of their heads. It was extremely brutal and direct. Basically, insects of the same level would end up dying together. This kind of fighting style was obviously disadvantageous to the Kiraj insect people. However, with a small trick of the ancient god in his half-asleep state, Kel Thuzad suddenly discovered that the canopy of undead, which was usually accurate everywhere, could not be held up in the sky above the Kiraj temple. An even more ancient and evil will forcibly took control of the weather here. This forced Kel Thuzad to let his subordinates engage in the most primitive form of attrition with the insect people. Other than the insects, the Kiraj insect people also had monsters like the Anubisath giants and the obsidian golems. The Scourge army used the fat abominations and various deformed large-sized monsters to fight against them. Whether they were willing or not, the two sides fought until the sky was dark and the moon was dark. Go. Kill it. Why do you have to use your feet to step on it? You can roll over. Don't you think this lich is a joke? Releasing a bug swarm storm on a construct? Take a horse stance and punch it with your left hook and right hook. At the highest level of the Breaking Dawn Mage Tower in the Dalajan, it was very lively. Almost the entire floor echoed with the shouts of a certain bad alliance commander, as well as the giggles of seductive women. How lucky. If it wasn't like this, the Night Elf warriors would have to face such a monster with their flesh and blood. My heart aches. Tyron gently pressed her hand on her sexy collarbone. Duque, you're so bad. Queen Sylvanas rarely showed her tender side. His impression of Queen she had always been extraordinary and valiant. Perhaps it was due to her environment, but in history, she carried the fate of the entire kingdom as a ranger general, but she also had to bear the future of the entire Forgotten Ones. In this life, although she was crowned queen, and with Duque's help, the elf situation was much better. But she had to always wear a mask called strength. However, after being captured this time, Sylvanas suddenly realized that he was weak in a certain sense. It turned out that at certain times, there were many things that she couldn't resist or control. In the most desperate moment, she called out Duque's name. Duque did not disappoint her and responded to her call for help. From being ambushed by the Burning Legion, to falling into the enemy's hands, to almost dying, to somehow returning safely. At this moment, Sylvanas still felt as if he was in a dream. Tyrande, on the other hand, was even calmer. This was not the first time she had been captured. She was right next to them, supporting her chin with her hand, perfectly accompanying them. If Duque wanted to play any tricks, she would not reject him either. But Duque did not force them to do anything, understanding that they were still in a state of shock, and only occasionally rubbed their ears against each other. At the start, Duque seemed to have endless desires. Sylvanas's long legs and Tyrande's Mount Hyjal were all places that he would forget to leave. However, after a long time, one would realize that people's passionate love would turn into a kind of attachment that they couldn't bear to part with. It was as if after getting used to each other's existence, they could no longer bear to be apart. It was a strange love mixed with kinship, rich and lasting. Duque, I've advanced. You two aren't together? Jaina rushed in excitedly, but was surprised to find that Duque was just hugging. Duque bared his teeth. All right. Congratulations, Breaking Dawn Great Wizard Jaina. Jaina put her hands on her hips. Hey, my lover and teacher, when are you going to become a demigod? Soon. As for the requirements to step into the divine realm, Duke already had a vague guess. The three divinities of fire, arcane, and ice were obviously necessary. But now that he had fused with shadow, he needed at least a holy divinity to balance it out. This gave Duque a headache. But now, he had an idea of a frost divinity, Frost Dragon Sapphiron. Duque had thought that he would get rid of the great frost lich, Kel Thuzad. Who knew that his target had changed to Sapphiron? If that was the case, it would be much more convenient. In case Sapphiron's divinity was not enough, Duque had another target, Sindagosa, who had saved Arthas in Fellwood Forest. This former queen of the Blue Dragons, and now the mother of the Frost Dragons, was definitely qualified. However, with the entire ice-crowned citadel forcibly sealing itself in 10,000 years of ice, Duke had no way of finding trouble with Sindagosa. As for the holy divinity, the only one Duque could think of was the Naru of the Outland. Divinity was a very precious thing. If it was the one in Shotrath City, it was not impossible to achieve his goal through negotiation. The only problem was arcane magic. Duke couldn't figure out where he was going to get the divinity of the arcana system. However, he could only cross the bridge when he came to it. At this moment, seeing Jaina wagging an invisible tail with an expression that said, "Praise me quickly," Duque smiled. "Don't you want a reward? Come, come, come. Let me give you some pointers on the flow of magic in the ORZ position." Jaina's face instantly turned red. Even though she was hesitating, she still obeyed. Putting aside Duque's nonsense, Duque played hard this time, forcing the Scourge army and Thun to fight each other, which greatly reduced the pressure on the Alliance and the Horde. The Horde was able to catch their breath. Without the harassment of the flying insects, Thrall was able to successfully complete the work of disaster relief and organizing the troops. This time, Thrall gave a clear answer. If the Alliance can send 100,000 troops, the Horde can send 50,000 warriors to attack on Kiraj in Silithus. After the Alliance got rid of Ragnaros and Nefarian, Duque gave the important task of dealing with Hacker to William. He brought a group of people and rushed over to support Aurelia. While Queen Sylvie and Tyrande were resting, Duque went to visit old Mograine. Duque could hardly recognize Mograine. Chapter 1235. Old, decrepit, dispirited, lifeless eyes, Sally Whitemane was taking care of such an old man in a room with thick curtains that could barely see a trace of sunlight. Duque could not associate the old man in front of him with the Ashbringer who had conquered the Molten Core a few months ago. What happened? Duque muttered to himself. Sally, who was dressed in a priest's robe, trotted over and whispered into Duque's ear, "Both of father's sons are." Duque only understood the whole story after Sally's explanation. Due to Duque's reminder and the phantom enchantment that was placed in Alexandros' armor, Alexandros managed to escape death. Escaping death did not mean that he had obtained happiness. When the Burning Legion space trap was activated, the furious old Mograine went to clean up the mess. Due to losing his hammer, he pulled out his sword and ended the life of his son, Reynold, who had defected to the Scourge army. However, this was not the end. Almost instantly, the aura of death hidden in Reynold's heart turned him into a Death Knight. However, the Scourge army's conspiracy did not stop there. Old Mograine's youngest son, Darian Mograine, had secretly disobeyed his father's order to stay behind and followed him to the Sodorol River. At this time, he did not see the scene of Reynold's sneak attack on his father. Instead, when he turned around, he saw his father kill Reynold with his own hands. Darian did not know the ins and outs of the matter, but seeing his father kill his brother with his own hands, he was even more confused. At this time, the spy who brought him here revealed his true face, the undying assassin. He easily killed the confused Darian and brought his body back to the Scourge army, turning him into a Death Knight. Within a day, of his two sons who could have inherited his legacy, one rebelled and was killed, while the other was killed by a sneak attack. Both of his sons, who were originally paladins, suddenly became Death Knights. For an old paladin who had fought for Rotterdam his whole life and fought against the Scourge army for 6 years, nothing could be more shocking than this. It was obvious that the physical injuries were secondary. The mental trauma was the key. Sally's eyes were red, and she looked as if she was about to cry as she said, "Ever since that day, foster father has barely eaten or slept. I don't know what to do either." Duque looked at Sally and sighed deeply. The situation in this life was much better than in the original history. If this had happened at this point in time, old Mograine would have died long ago, and Reynold and Sally would have fallen into the mad Scarlet Crusade, becoming the cheating couple in the players' mouths. Now, Sally had been completely cleansed and had become a priest surrounded by holy light. But Duque couldn't estimate the suffering of Reynold and Darian. There was nothing he could do about it. He was also a human being. He was mentally and physically exhausted to be able to take care of the people closest to him. What's more, this had happened while he was on an expedition to Blackwing's nest. He was truly powerless. The longer he stayed in this world, the more he integrated into this era, the more Duque felt emotional. Is it Duque? Old Mograine still looked confused. A look of pleasant surprise appeared on Sally's face. This was the first time she had heard her foster father speak in several days. Yes, yes. It's Sir Marcus. Mograine twisted his neck that seemed to have mostly rusted to death, revealing a face that was still sunk into the abyss of despair. You're so busy, you don't have to come see me. I've had enough. As an old man who is about to die, I've had enough. Whether it's as a subject, as a holy knight, or as a failed father. My life has come to a point where it needs to be summed up. He spoke very slowly, but it made Duque feel as if the sharp teeth of a saw were pulling at his heart. Duque strode forward and pressed his hands on old Mograine's broad shoulders. No. Alexandros. It's not time for your life to be summed up. You. In the name of the commander of the Alliance, I order you. Look at me. The old man raised his head in confusion. The next second, he saw Duque switch to his own state. First was the glittering holy form. In Alexandros' impression, the bright holy light on Duque's body could almost catch up to that of Archbishop Alonso's Fail and Uther. After another second, Duque suddenly switched to shadow form. The dark aura that was as deep as the endless universe made him, a holy knight, shudder. Duque, you mean? Duque seemed to be implying something. Do you see? The boundary between light and darkness is not that clear. Similarly, the boundary between life and death is thinner than you think. A while ago, the tribe announced that in order to resist the terrifying Kiraj insectoid army, the Forsaken would be included in the tribe. The Forsaken. Is it that guy Anastrian? Yes. Why did the Alliance acquiesce to this? Isn't it because the enemies who want to destroy the world of Azeroth are too many and too powerful? The Burning Legion, the Scourge Army, the Ancient Gods, the Elemental Lords, and all kinds of inferior evil gods. Alexandros, this world has long passed the era where the Alliance alone can defeat the enemy. Old Mograine was silent again. Yes. We hate the tribe because they brought a terrible disaster to the Alliance. Millions of soldiers and civilians died tragically under the tribe's slaughter. We will never forget this. But now the tribe is our alliance. The Scourge Army also swept through the Long Song Forest, and Anastrian also betrayed his people and became an Undying. But now they have no choice but to stand on our side and fight for the world. Old Mograine looked up at the sky and let out a long breath. He understood what Duque meant. Since the first Undying can escape the will of the Lich King, then there will be a second, a third. Maybe in the future, Darien will rejoin the Alliance as a Death Knight, or at least become a comrade of the Alliance. This was not Duque boasting. According to the original development of history, Darien would break free from the control of the Lich King Arthas and lead a large group of Death Knights to form the Black Blade Knights, turning to fight for the righteous cause of the world. Hearing Duque persuade him like this, old Mograine suddenly laughed. Duque, you're really bad as the commander of the Alliance. You actually didn't let a 60-year-old veteran retire. Seeing the old paladin's smiling face, Duque knew that old Mograine had thought things through and patted his shoulder. Yo, old brother, it's not time for you to sum up your life. Chapter 1236. After taking care of old Mograine, Duque led the army to the Sin Dorii kingdom without stopping. With Naxxramas forcing Kiraj to surrender, the Scourge army had to fight the bugs head-on. The Alliance's military strength, which was originally very tight, suddenly became abundant. In the camp in the southeast of the Long Song Forest, Duque and the others met Aurelia, Rothma Theron, and Hadgeron Mini. After not seeing her for a while, Aurelia had lost a little weight. The pair of giant cats actually showed signs of shrinking. They were originally a very violent symbol. Whether Duque wanted to or not, they easily dominated Duque's vision and gave off a sense of mass. If there weren't outsiders, Duque would have reached out to confirm. Aurelia smiled charmingly at Duque and hugged Duque lightly. Then, she hugged her second sister, Sylvanas. Sister, are you okay? I'm fine. It's just that someone pretending to be Kel Thuzad touched my thigh. It's disgusting, Queen Sylvanas complained in the whisper of the wind. Aurelia couldn't help but laugh. Beside her, Sasha also laughed. It had to be said that when the three sisters laughed together, the scene was as beautiful as a painting. Duque was left to the side. He was basically a passerby. Aurelia combed her bright blonde hair. I knew that Duque would definitely save you as soon as he came out. I will continue to carry out my duties. If I really died and became an undead, what would you do? Queen Sylvanas suddenly asked her sisters. Aurelia sighed. She didn't know how to answer. Generals would inevitably die in battle. Who could guarantee that their loved ones wouldn't die? Moreover, the four sisters often fought on the front lines. Suddenly, Sasha replied cleverly, yes, it must be Duque's fault that we couldn't save you in time. Then I'll have many daughters with Duque, and then add a compound surname to each of them. Yes, it's called something something Sylvanas Marcus. Duque was speechless. After fooling around for a while, they returned to the main topic. It's time to put an end to the millennia of conflict between the elves and the ogres in the north. As Duque spoke, almost every elf present felt a chill in their hearts. In the past, the proud elves might have scoffed at such words and scolded Duque for bragging. Now, Duque had used his miracles again and again to conquer the hearts of every elf with all kinds of miraculous achievements. Even if they knew that Duque, that bastard, had stolen the heart of their most respected queen, and even the queen and her sisters, they were willing to accept it. Following Duque's declaration, the sky suddenly darkened. Even the elves on the watchtowers who were on duty couldn't help but look up at the sky, at the humongous flying warship that was emitting terrifying noises. Looking up from below, they could only see the strange bottom of the ship with densely packed gun barrels, as well as 8 huge propellers that were stirring up strong winds, causing the nearby treetops to sway left and right. From below, they could also see the huge golden eagle at the bow of the ship. This thing was almost identical to the eagle head on Eagle's Nest Mountain. Rangers with better eyesight would be able to see the terrifying 4 decks of the ship from the side. At this moment, the muzzle of every cannon had already been opened, and the lion emblem of the Alliance could clearly be seen on the cannons above the muzzle. None of the elves here were mediocre. Most of them were veterans who had experienced the second and third battles at the Dark Portal. The weaker rookies would have their throats slit in an instant when facing the ogres, who were also adept at forest warfare. It wouldn't have been obvious before the war, but only after experiencing continuous wars would the higher-ups of the elves realize how much the elves, with their long lifespans and low fertility rate, were at a disadvantage in wars where human lives were worthless. This was a war between the elves and the ogres that had lasted for more than 6,000 years. Both sides were extremely familiar with each other. It wasn't that the elves couldn't use magic to flatten the ogres, but the ogres could also ask shamans to let evil and powerful spirits possess them, and use a method similar to God's descent to perish together with the elven archmages. It wasn't that Queen Sylvie hadn't thought of using the dwarves' mechanized troops to deal with the ogres, but the ogres' territory was too disgusting. It was a mountain forest with undulating mountains, and steam tanks couldn't enter at all. Until now, Duque gracefully bowed to Aurelia in a noble manner. Greetings. Respected Troll War heroine, Lady Aurelia, may I have the honor of inviting you to witness the complete destruction of the Amani Empire? The destruction of the Amani Empire? With her beautiful appearance, Aurelia had lost count of how many gorgeous and sweet words of praise she had heard from handsome men in the first half of her life. But she had never heard an invitation like Duque's, which made her blood surge and every cell in her body excited. How many years had she been guarding the borders? How many companions, how many juniors she had high hopes for, had been slaughtered by the ogres, and they couldn't even retrieve their mutilated corpses. She was the heroine of the Troll War. She was also a witness to this terrible war. She hated evil, and she hated these Amani ogres even more. Facing Duque's invitation, she didn't gracefully place her slender fingers on it. Instead, she hugged Duque, and her fiery red lips landed on Duque's forehead, face, and lips like raindrops. Finally, she suddenly stopped and gave Duque a deep kiss that lasted for a minute as a response to his invitation. The elves were stunned, and then they smiled in understanding. Who knew that the greedy Duque would shamelessly extend an invitation to Queen Sylvie after tasting the lips of the elves' goddess? Great Queen of Sin, Dorii, what about you? Queen Sylvie put her hands on her hips and said calmly, yes, I'll go. This was too far apart. Duque's face fell. Of course, the elves were secretly happy. Who knew that in the whisper of the wind, Queen Sylvie would secretly swear, little bastard. If you can really exterminate the Amani trolls, along with the favor from last time, I'll just wear the set of maid clothes that you gave me, that I'm extremely ashamed of. Hip-length maid outfit, black silk, long legs, lace. Oh. And a real queen would wear it for him. Duque was so excited that he was about to go crazy. He immediately put on a sanctimonious act. The group rode on the flashy pure-blood dragon eagles, followed by Lord Thema and the others who were riding normal dragon eagles, and flew to the Heavenbreaker. Magni went up to them first. Welcome, beautiful elven ladies. Alright, are you ready to trample the Amani Empire under your feet? Hundreds of high-level elves nodded in unison. Yes. Chapter 1237. It's time. Those damned long ears have lost the protection of the humans. They're nothing but prey for the Amani warriors. Muster your courage and fight. Victory belongs to us, the Amani. On the platform, the new leader of the Amani trolls, Dakra, was giving a passionate speech. The previous leader, Zujin, had been captured by the elves and then executed prematurely under the covert instigation of a certain fellow with the surname Du. The Amani trolls had fallen into a state of chaos for 10 years. Eichelson, who had the soul of the White Eagle, Nararak, who had the evil spirit of the Great Bear, and the other powerful trolls refused to give way. It was only recently that a new powerhouse, who had inherited almost all of Zujin's skills, Dakra, took over. He reunited the chaotic Amani tribes. The trolls did not need any reason to fight the elves. The blood feud between them had long been engraved in their bloodlines, branded in the depths of their souls. All the Eridar Gemini had to do was to disguise themselves as a forest troll with a similar bloodline and spread the message of all races are attacking the Alliance. That was enough to convince these simple-minded fellows to attack the Alliance at the most opportune time. It could be said that the Amani trolls had succeeded in dragging down the Alliance's forces. This success had also led to the Alliance's most terrifying counterattack today. A strange roar that many Amani trolls found unfamiliar came from the horizon, and the sky suddenly darkened. It was a gigantic flying warship. It was so huge that it looked like a small mountain flying in midair. Unfortunately, the clear man-made traces on its body made the Amani trolls understand that this thing had nothing to do with the gods. It had to be said that most trolls were pathetic creatures. From the era of the Darkness Empire to the present day, the troll civilization had not improved at all in the past 25,000 years. Primitive and ignorant. Faced with the flying warship that was more than 500 meters above the ground, some trolls actually bowed to the sky, and some nervously struck their gongs as a warning signal. However, the signals transmitted by the gongs were all over the place. Some said that the enemy was coming from the south, while others said that they were coming from the east, west, and north. Dakra was so angry that he stomped his feet. Attack! Shoot down that blasphemous thing. It had to be said that Dakra's attack was not entirely unreliable. At 500 meters, ordinary trolls would not be able to throw themselves that high even if they broke their arms. However, the range of a commander-tier fellow was obviously different. Eichelson, who possessed the eagle's soul, summoned a flock of mountain eagles to soar into the sky. Galay, who could summon dragonhawks, sent a flock of dragonhawks with flame bombs. There was also Dakra, who possessed both strength and strength. Their attacks were definitely above average. Unfortunately, because of a certain someone's death, the Heavenbreaker had changed from a twin-propeller engine to an 8-propeller engine. Its tonnage had also directly changed from a cruiser to an aircraft carrier. Naturally, the Heaven Breaker's defense also increased. The Heaven Breaker's defense was definitely at the level of a main city. The attacks of the three troll powerhouses had only just risen to a height of 200 meters when they collided with the ice barrier that was fixed to the Heaven Breaker. As long as the mana supply wasn't interrupted, any projectile that entered within 300 meters of the Heaven Breaker would be forcibly slowed down. Then, they ran into a power grid formed by 12 pylons at the bottom of the ship with lightning magic. Then there were the 36 barrage cannons. Of course, this thing couldn't be a real concentrated cannon. This thing was similar to the machine guns that could only be moved by human hands during World War I. Only, it was more primitive and thicker. 24 gun barrels that were nearly 2 meters long and could fit an infant's fist were arranged on a huge drum. By continuously moving one of the gun barrels to the position of the scope, the automatic trigger would be pulled to activate what could be read as a bullet or a cannonball. When all 24 gun barrels had been fired, a specially made disc would be used to reload all 24 gun barrels at once. Although 24 shots would be enough to kill them, the dense and continuous firing, coupled with the attack power of the death knell. Against the slowed mountain eagles and dragon hawks, it was as simple as using a shotgun to shoot turkeys. Bang! 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 Following the short and orderly sounds of the cannons, a large group of troll could only watch as the creatures they were so proud of were turned into sieves. Broken limbs, innards, blood, and feathers rained down like rain of blood. No. Dakara wailed. On the Heaven Breaker, the Windrunner's sisters and the other high-ranking elves were led by Duque and Magni to the lowest level. This is... Queen Sylvanas looked at the metal objects that were shaped like rugby balls and larger than bathtubs. She was a little confused. Bombs for aerial attacks. Duque pursed his lips. Like the cannonballs for steam tanks? No, these are simpler in terms of craftsmanship. Of course, because they're simple, we can put more explosives in them. At this point, Magni and Duque looked at each other and smiled. Then, a dwarf king and a human commander smiled slyly at the same time. The two raised their hands and high-fived each other, shouting in unison, "Explosion!" That's art. Duque clapped again, attracting the attention of the high-ranking elves. All right, my dear elven allies, you can write the names of your sacrificed friends and family on the cannonballs. Then, let these named cuties send the trolls to hell. It had to be said that this was a good idea. Picking up the grease pens that Duque had prepared, the elves began to write names, blessings, and curses on the polished cannonballs. 5 minutes later, the elves watched from a safe distance as the Heaven Breaker's lowest hatch slowly opened. Begin dropping the bombs. Magni ordered. This was a vertical drop that couldn't even be considered a dive bomb. Even a 500-pound bomb couldn't be blown by the wind. It wasn't just the Alliance. Even the trolls stared dumbfoundedly at the huge metal bombs falling from the sky. Attack! Dakara yelled. Wooden spears began to hurl at the free-falling bombs. But was there any use in that? In less than 3 seconds, the entire Zul Amon camp was rocked by an earth-shattering explosion. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The deafening sound could be heard even from the elven camp 50 kilometers away. Most of the elves on the Heaven Breaker stared dumbfounded at the devastation beneath their feet. Because they had come from the sky, they had easily passed through the trolls' meticulously laid traps and defensive lines. So, when the bombs landed, everyone could clearly see the trolls' city, which had stood at the south of Long Song Forest for more than 5,000 years, instantly falling into the abyss of destruction. The 500-pound bombs easily blasted a terrifying crater that was more than 5 meters deep and 20 to 30 meters wide. If it were used as a 10-meter-high diving pool, it would be as easy as pouring water into it. Chapter 1238. All sorts of miscellaneous items were sent flying into the air. Rows of wooden and thatched houses suffered the same fate as the stone palace. In the face of the explosion, they too collapsed and were sucked into the shockwaves of the explosion. When the seemingly sturdy stone palace that gave them a sense of security was easily destroyed like a thatched hut, every troll finally realized that the shadow of death had been hanging over their heads. Regardless of whether they were soldiers or civilians, the trolls were in a state of panic. They were like rats that had to flee in the face of a flood, leaving the buildings and running for their lives. But no matter how fast their legs were, how could they outrun the airships that were carpet-bombing the skies? This time, Duque had not only brought the Heaven Breaker, but also the Black Pearl and the Flying Dutchman. There were also two less technologically advanced airships, the Little Boy and the Fatty, that were used for bombing. These two bombardment airships looked a little like a big-bellied goldfish. Apart from the two huge propellers, the only other thing was a fat hull. But in terms of bomb capacity, these two bombardment airships were no less than the Heaven Breaker. As they slowly advanced at a speed of 30 kilometers per hour, they dropped 250, 500, and 1,000 pounds of bombs like fish ovulating eggs. Asterisk boom. Asterisk boom. Asterisk it was an earth-shattering shock. It was a deafening explosion. No matter how fast the trolls' legs were, they could not outrun the shockwaves of the explosion. Their escape was just to delay their deaths. Along with the unceasing tremors, everything about the Amani troll empire was erased from the land of Zul Aman. Who cared if you were a brave warrior? A powerful being possessed by a powerful animal spirit? A sturdy stone totem pole? It was Xiao Chao, who was too weak to even stand up to a gust of wind. Everything was destroyed in the face of this overwhelming destructive power. In the next instant, the fire soared into the sky, and the ground caved in. The Zul Aman, which had been built on a high hill for drainage purposes, was flattened by this terrifying chain of explosions. Standing on the high platform, the chief of the Amani troll empire, Dakra, was completely stunned. He stood there in a daze, watching the scene unfold. He even forgot to dodge. In his dreams, Zwaman would become the capital of the revived Amani Empire. But now, before this dream city could be expanded, it had already started to disappear in the long river of history. So what if he survived? His people, all the elites of the Amani clan, had died in front of him. As the last direct bloodline of the Amani royal family, the demise of the Amani clan meant that the revival of the Amani Empire had come to an end. No, this can't be true. I must be dreaming. Dakra muttered to himself as if he had gone mad. Chief! Hurry up and run. The Amani clan is finished. The warlock Lord Malakas pounced over and tried to pull Dakra away. But at this time, two bombs the size of a small house fell from the sky and landed on the largest altar. Bang! The explosion of a 1,000-pound bomb would definitely shake the earth and mountains. In an instant, Dakra's giant bear incarnation was destroyed. Once the bear incarnation that could greatly strengthen his armor disappeared, his remaining 3 incarnations were actually fragile. Suddenly, a few more bombs fell. This time, Dakra did not take it head-on. He transformed into a lynx and tried to dodge. Who knew that he would suddenly find that his movements, which had already become incomparably agile, suddenly slowed down. To the onlookers, this was already in slow motion. Who is it? The only reply he got was the explosion of the bombs. Boom! Dakra's head spun from the explosion. His ears were filled with an ear-piercing buzzing sound. His vision was blurred, and he could not see clearly. But in his daze, he felt that there were no more bombs falling. His instincts told him that a powerful being was descending from the sky. Die! Dakra threw out a rusty machete covered in blood. The funny thing was that his dizziness was so strong that he actually threw the machete at Malakas's head, almost killing his number 1 fighter in an instant. Ah! The next moment, he heard the Warlock Lord's tragic cry. His vision became a little more normal, and he was immediately shocked to see that Malakas's body was like a porcupine pierced with arrows. In that instant, the Warlock Lord could not be any more dead. Without any hesitation, Dakra used his whirlwind slash. That's right. Since there was no one around him, he might as well attack indiscriminately. He would definitely hit anyway. That was how it should have been. Unfortunately, a ray of golden sword light and a ray of lightning sword light slashed toward him at the same time. Dakara instinctively used his epic-grade machete to meet them. The problem was, those two swords were divine weapons. Dakara was not strong enough to begin with. Moreover, he was not in his best condition after the explosion. He was unable to unleash his full combat power. In the face of the majestic and invincible divine weapons, his epic-grade machete was shattered by the two rays of sword light. With a loud bang, the two rays of sword light flashed past. Dakara's legs below his knees were gone. He knelt heavily on the ground. All of this happened in an instant. A single slash easily broke through his whirlwind chop, and the light from the sword easily shattered his weapon, slicing off Dakara's calf. Ha! Dakara yelled as he waved his arms. His left hand was infused with the strength of the mountain eagle, while his right was infused with the soul of the dragon hawk. Together, he struck the figure in the blue and white robes in front of him. Oh! Lightning and fire? What a coincidence, me too. Dakara had once used the lightning of the mountain eagle to kill 13 high-level elven rangers, and the flames of the dragon hawk to burn 9 elven mages to death. He was very confident in his own strength. Having confidence was a good thing, but in the face of a higher level of mystery, everything was hiss. Nothing. Will. Righteousness. Ah! Dakara let out the most agonizing howl he had ever made in the battle. His left hand, which used lightning, was instantly charred by the stronger lightning, while his right hand, which used fire, was slowly burned away inch by inch, leaving behind only his blackened bones. In less than 10 seconds, the great Amani chief Dakara had been reduced to a human scoundrel. Two powerful armored hands pressed down on him, one on the left and the other on the right, trying to force him to kneel on the ground. Even so, he struggled with all his might, straightening his body and trying to bite down on those two hands with his fangs. Just then, a voice rang out. Nice to meet you. I am Duke Marcus, the last destroyer of the Amani Empire. As he spoke, Duque took a step forward and stomped heavily on Dakara's mouth. Chapter 1239. Dakara's expression changed to one of ferocious ecstasy. Trolls were not ogres, after all. The two large fangs in their mouths were merely ornaments. What really tore flesh apart were the fangs within. However, they were only average, and not even comparable to carnivorous creatures like sharks. The hands of the two holy knights were not so easy to bite. Just the high-quality epic-level gauntlets alone were enough to knock out his own teeth. To Dakara, Duque daring to step on him while wearing cloth boots was no different from courting death. So he did not hesitate to extend his neck and bite down. Who knew, just a moment ago, in Dakara's eyes, Duque's leg was no different from a chicken's leg. In the next second, when Duque infused his leg with divine power, it became something completely different in his field of vision and perception. It was as hot as lava, as violent as lightning, as dark as the convergence of all the evil in the world. Dakara's poor knowledge made it impossible for him to understand how this could happen. Bite with his teeth? What kind of joke was that? Even if his teeth were as sharp as a shark's, how could they possibly block this heavy kick that could topple mountains and overturn the heavens and earth? With a loud thud, Dakara let out a muffled groan as his stick-like body fell backwards, lying pathetically on the ground. His mouth full of teeth had turned into bloody shards that flew in all directions. Especially the two long fangs that were unique to trolls. As they spun in mid-air, they were caught by two slender hands from different elves. Huh! The fangs of the last troll chief? Looking at the huge fangs that were drilled with many holes and adorned with troll teeth, Aurelia laughed. She laughed so hard that tears welled up in her eyes. Sister, take good care of it. This is a souvenir that you can't buy even if you have the money. Queen Sylvanas smiled like a flower, her golden hair dancing in the wind. On the surface, Queen Sylvanas looked calm, but upon closer inspection, one could see that her chest was rising and falling rapidly. She was excited too. Think about it. For almost 7,000 years, the border conflicts between the trolls and the high elves had never stopped. Every year, tens to thousands of elves died in territorial conflicts. Even though the elves had always had the upper hand with their runestones, the hatred between them was so deep that they had never understood each other. If Zul Aman was destroyed, the trolls would lose their last base in the Dragonsong Forest. Without Zul Aman's protection, even without the help of the Alliance, the Sin Dorii Kingdom had the ability to exterminate the trolls by themselves. Not to mention the fact that the flying ships had wiped out the main force of the Amani clan here. Servanaz's blood surged. Just thinking about it made him excited. What outsiders said was their business. Every elf would credit her, the new queen, with the achievement of wiping out the Amani trolls. It had nothing to do with the desire to rule. It was purely because it could dilute the mark left behind by Anastrian's millennia of rule. Only by erasing the influence of this elven traitor could Sin Dorii truly let go of this burden and continue to move forward, standing tall among the nations of the world. Duke smashed Dakra's teeth with a kick, and Gavin Rad and Tyrion, who were on either side of him, pushed Dakra to the ground with his staff. Dakra could only use his strong chest muscles to receive Duke's foot. The kick was so heavy that every muscle in Dakra's back was pressed against the hard bricks of the altar. The sound of bricks shattering could be heard from his back. Fresh blood seeped out from all the wounds on his body, staining the stones red. Dakra roared, his face flushed red. His bones creaked, and beads of sweat dripped down his face. He resisted with all his might. His pride, his noble status as the Amani chief, did not allow him to submit to this puny and weak human. However, Duke's kick was as heavy as 1,000 mountains. Dakra used all his strength, but could not move his body, let alone break free. Let go, Duke instructed softly. The two paladins immediately let go. In the next instant, most of Dakra's body was sealed in ice, leaving only his head. Because his neck was under the effect of the deceleration spell, he could only move in slow motion, like a slow-motion camera. The great Amani trolls will never submit. As long as one of us is left, we will fight for all eternity. Dakra, who was suppressed beneath Duke's feet, could not get up at all. Even so, he continued to curse fiercely. I know you want to die. I can grant you that wish, Duke said leisurely. But not today. Today, even if the Burning Legion and the Calamity Army come together, they will not be able to save the Amani trolls. Just watch obediently, watch the last scene of your clansmen's lives. Dakra's face darkened and paled. Today was not just a great humiliation to him. It was the darkest and most terrifying despair. No matter how his people tried to hide, they could still be easily found. Innumerable elves swarmed over from all over the mountains, and the mountains near Zul Aman were all decorated with their unique, intricately patterned war flags. The war songs of the elves rang out, reverberating in every nook and cranny of the forest. What he did not know was that in the second battle at the Dark Portal, the demon spirit warning system that had caused Zhu Jin's trolls to bleed had already been upgraded. The tracking system installed on the flying ships could easily detect any living being within a 3,000-meter radius, and shoot at them with fluorescent materials that could dissipate. In a forest battle, the greatest advantage was concealment. Whoever was found first would lose more than half their lives. Even without looking, the experienced Dakra could tell from the sounds that his tribesmen were running for their lives, while the elves were shooting deadly arrows into the hearts and skulls of the trolls as though they were on a safari. This was the troll's only weakness, which was its super regenerative ability. Dakra finally broke down. He had once been a high and mighty chief. Even in the most difficult times for his people, his strength had still soared. His strength and status were enough for him to look down on all life. Who dared to disrespect him? But today, his strength was useless. His base had been destroyed, and he had even been captured by a human wizard. He could not even save a single one of his men. Dakra lost his composure and shouted in the common language he had once looked down on, "Why? Those long-eared creatures are the invaders. Why must the Amani trolls be destroyed? Why? Duke's lips curled into a mysterious smile. It's hard to say who was right and who was wrong in the past. The Amani trolls must be destroyed simply because you were on the wrong side. Chapter 1240. If one really had to say who was right and who was wrong, it would really be a mess. Not only did the High Elves snatch the trolls' territory, but all the other races in Azeroth were also fighting for the trolls' territory. After all, during the era of the Darkness Empire, almost all of ancient Kalimdor was the territory of 2 trolls. Just the Amani Empire alone was about half the size of the Eastern Kingdoms. To be fair, even Duke didn't feel comfortable destroying such an ancient country. It was a pity. You Amani trolls shouldn't have sided with the evil faction that seeks to destroy the world of Azeroth, Duke said in a low voice. Yes, even the Dark Spear trolls of Woking had defected to the Horde. Duke could turn a blind eye and allow the Amani trolls to continue existing. He could even act as a mediator to resolve conflicts between the 2 sides. Just like how the Night Elves had exiled the High Elves, no matter what, to fight the Burning Legion head-on, they would need as many cannon fodder as they could get. It was a pity that the Amani trolls had sided with the wrong side, so Duke didn't mind using his position to avenge his woman and wipe out the entire Amani race. Dakra was sweating profusely and trembling all over. He was already heavily injured, and now being stepped on by Duke and sealed in ice, he was so enraged that blood gushed out of his lungs and dripped down from the corner of his mouth. He suddenly began to hate his powerful regenerative abilities as a troll. If he was an elf with a weaker body, he might have already breathed his last. Yet, this body kept him alive and didn't let him die. And he had to watch as his own people were slaughtered and his home burned to the ground. Kill me, Duke Marcus. Kill me right now. Dakra howled. Kill you now? That's what I was thinking. But I've changed my mind. Duque crossed his arms and said slowly, it's too easy to kill you. But the opportunity to show the alliance's might doesn't come often. You. At this moment, Dakra finally understood what it meant to be unable to live or die. With a single glance from Duque, someone dragged Daka away to keep an eye on him. Dear, I'll leave it to you. Duque smiled at the Windrunner sisters. The 3 Windrunner sisters felt that they should be extremely grateful to Duque. However, after carefully experiencing it, they realized that this was not gratitude, but absolute worship, even to the point of faith. 3 days later, the streets of New Silvermoon City were empty. Almost all the elves had gathered at the new arena. This was not extravagant, brutal pleasure. This arena was built after Queen Sylvia came to power, and it could hold up to 50,000 spectators. Apart from special festivals, there would be elven warriors personally fighting every weekend in order to arouse the martial spirit of Sin Dorii. Today, the elves gathered together to celebrate the destruction of the Amani trolls. Several elven experts, including Queen Sylvie, personally took the field and killed several Amani leaders, including Dakra. In the VIP seats, Illyria couldn't help but reveal an intoxicated expression as she listened to the loud shouts of the elves. Duque said, I thought you'd take the field. Aurelia smiled. Second sister needs something like reputation more than I do. Plus, I'm the general of Silver Dawn now, not Sin Dorii. Duque smiled. Reputation was something that couldn't be seen or touched. You only knew how good it was when you needed it. It was hard to say whether the elves hated the Amani trolls or the scourge that destroyed Silvermoon City the most. The elves' lifespan of thousands of years was too long. To them, the tragic deaths of their friends and family were like yesterday. After Sylvanas became queen, she was able to completely destroy one of the elves' 2 greatest enemies, the Amani trolls. It could be said that from that moment on, the elves truly recognized her as their queen. Aurelia suddenly sighed. I fought against the Amani trolls for 3,000 years, and suddenly they were destroyed by a new invention from the humans and dwarves. What a strange feeling. I'm thinking, if the High Elves were the ones who fell behind and were destroyed. Sasha blinked. If that really happened, what would you do to us, Duque? Would you choose to help the trolls fight the elves? Duque was speechless. Please, the difference in looks is enough for me to abandon the trolls and become an elf lover. As for Sasha, Duque directly teased her. Sorry, unless my cute Sasha runs off to become a troll with 2 canine teeth, I won't choose the trolls. Sasha's face instantly turned red. I don't have canine teeth, much less become a troll. Duque decisively replied, then as long as you and your sister are in the elven race, even if the trolls are 10,000 years more advanced than the elves, I will still choose the elves. Looks are justice. My women are justice. Ahem, it's good that I know this. Of course, I can't say it like that. Aurelia loved him deeply, but she was also a righteous woman. If it came down to it, she would have to choose between him and her people. That choice would definitely make Duque heartache. Luckily, he wouldn't have that chance. Duque took a deep breath. There's a saying among humans, personality determines fate. I feel that the characteristics of a race determine their achievements and future. Perhaps there are many what-ifs in history, but there is only one final result. Since a race makes such a choice under the influence of both internal and external forces, there will be an inevitable result. Aurelia didn't say anything and listened quietly. I have no intention of denying or distorting history, but I think that whether it's the wisdom of those in power or the will of fate, since humans and elves are progressing bit by bit, this is the achievement of history. When our achievements surpassed those of the trolls who stood on the opposite side of history, everything was set in stone. That's why when humans and elves first allied 2,800 years ago, the trolls had no chance of winning. Especially today, when the individual strength of the trolls can no longer surpass that of magic and technology, it's even more so. The martial arts that you've practiced for decades have become meaningless? How sad. Aurelia sighed. Perhaps. If you want to move forward, if you want your race to continue, you have to lose something. For example, outdated traditions. Duque pointed out this point. In Duque's opinion, at least the exaggerated and arrogant elves were bad habits that had to be abandoned. Aurelia nodded. Yes, it is indeed time for the elves to change. What we need is something more simple and unpretentious. Chapter 1241. In the twisting nether, in the Burning Legion's new fortress, the Eridar twins were huddled together as they convulsed. They were suffering the most terrible punishment. Other than their skulls, there were countless needle-like objects that kept injecting low-purity dark energy into their bodies. On the other side, a huge, strange, octopus-like tentacle was sucking the dark energy out of the holes in their skulls. This was forcefully reducing their power, and in the process, giving them the greatest pain. It was a classic double punishment of the soul and body. Suddenly, a huge red shadow with a blazing aura descended. It was the commander of the Burning Legion, Kill Jaden. Something must have been flipped, and the convulsing Gemini fell to the ground. Unable to catch her breath, the Gemini immediately knelt down to thank Kill Jaden. Thank you. Great Master. Thank you for your mercy, the Gemini said in unison. I hate mercy. Kill Jaden's voice rumbled. Because mercy means that my idiot underlings have messed up the plan, and I have no other replacements to replace them. Can your stupid brains even begin to understand the feeling of being twice as angry? The Gemini's beautiful and charming body was trembling uncontrollably. Suppressing the fear in their hearts, the Gemini nodded like chicks pecking at grains. I am very disappointed with the dimensional trap plan. You have placed your hopes on the traitors of the Legion and the uncontrollable false gods. It is wrong in itself. The Gemini kowtowed and begged for mercy. Next time, I hope to see a perfect result. I am not interested in the process. I only want the result. If it fails again, I think many lords will be interested to see how I put the two of you, who claim to be beautiful, into the body of a green-skinned lesser demon with eternal transfiguration. After saying that, Kill Jaden's huge shadow that was enough to fill the entire hall disappeared, leaving only 2 female demon lords who were trembling non-stop, still trapped in the deepest fear. The lesser demons were the lowest and most lowly existence in the Burning Legion. They were not even qualified to be cannon fodder. No demon would care about the life and death of a lesser demon, including any other individual of the lesser demon race. Which Void Duke didn't kill their way through mountains of corpses and seas of blood? He could even become an overlord. Just this identity alone was enough to make him the target of envy and hatred from billions of demons. If Gemini really fell to the point of becoming an inferior demon, the number of people who would do violence to them could definitely fill up any planet. The twins looked at each other. There was no need for words. They had known each other for more than 20,000 years, and they could understand each other's thoughts with just a glance. Apart from their deepest fear, they also felt a strong sense of unwillingness. In their eyes, the key to their failure this time was that Azeroth's protective shield was still strong. Although any Void Lord could sense that the magic circle left behind by the Pantheon Titan had weakened, it was still functioning well. At the very least, this could be considered an experiment. It was obviously Jaden's mistake, but unfortunately, the Master is always right. Once there was a mistake, it must be the servant's fault. The twins could only take the blame for this failure. Anyway, the Eridar tribe would never lack cunning and capable female demons. Duque didn't know about the tragedy of the Eridar twins, nor would he care about it. He watched Angela's monster movie with the magic mirror while ordering the air fleet to head south to support William. Stormwind didn't have a ranger team that could fight against the jungle trolls. This time, William used a more simple and violent method. Stranglethorn Vale's terrain was relatively gentler than Zwaman's, which allowed the dwarven steam tanks to be put to good use. Furthermore, the 3 Bronzebeard brothers had always been fond of William. For this southern expedition to Zul'Gurub, Magni brought out the strongest, lightning, tank army for William to command. The cannons were roaring, and the sound of explosions that symbolized destruction reverberated throughout Stranglethorn Vale. The dwarves used the cannons that Duque had taught them to plow a 5-kilometer-wide path of death in the northern region of Stranglethorn Vale. What? Concealment? That didn't exist. Unless the trolls could instantly turn their skin from green to black like the scorched earth like a chameleon, even if they could survive the terrifying volley of cannons, they wouldn't be able to pass through the line of death that followed. The front row was made up of 3 layers of human swordsmen, shieldbearers, and pikemen. The middle row was made up of dwarven musketeers and harpooneers standing on steam-armored vehicles. The back row was made up of a mix of mortars and archers. With the addition of the Dalajan mages, no trolls would be able to pass through this 50-meter-long zone of death. At night, the flares and expensive magic searchlights lit up the entire front line as if it was daytime. The trolls didn't stand a chance at all. Even if the trolls sent out the Gurubashi berserkers, which were as large as the ogres, it would only increase the number of targets. The new soldiers all expressed that they could shoot live targets, and their experience points increased rapidly. The battle that had been going on for the past few days was more like a planned massacre than a battle. However, the Alliance's luck ended when they advanced to Zul'Gurub. As one of the most important cities of the ancient Troll Empire, Zul'Gurub's terrain could be said to be easy to defend and difficult to attack. Between the endless mountains, there was a river that wasn't considered deep but was abnormally turbid. There were nightmarish things everywhere. In every bush, there could be several or even dozens of venomous snakes jumping out to take your life. Every object that looked like dead wood by the river could very well be a ferocious crocodile. Every time the soldiers went to fetch water, they had to tremble in fear. Inside the river, there were piranhas that could gnaw a living person into a boneless, fleshless human in a minute. However, the mechanized infantry division that the Alliance was so proud of couldn't be deployed in such a terrain. William, Bulang, and the other higher-ups of the Alliance were simply at their wits' end with the current situation. Yet, every day, there were close to 100 casualties among the soldiers. The morale of the Alliance dropped at a speed visible to the naked eye. Magni doted on William so much that he didn't even inform Duque. He secretly brought the newly built flying warship, Iron Hammer, to Zul'Vagurub in an attempt to replicate Duque's success with the Amani trolls. It was a pity that Magni and William had suffered a huge loss this time. A group of bats appeared. There were more than 10,000 of them, each the size of a pony. This terrifying number, coupled with the presence of the high-level troll priest, Yekrik Iron Hammer, crashed on its first voyage. More than 800 dwarves and human soldiers died along with it. Chapter 1242. In Stranglethorn Vale's Alliance command, the higher-ups of the Alliance were debating endlessly. "Can't we just blow up all the ravines?" William asked. Bulang rolled his eyes at William. "First, gunpowder requires money. Second, even if we had so much gunpowder, you wouldn't be able to pay for it even if you spent 100 years of Stormwind's taxes. Third, this is all damned muddy ground. Heavy cannons can't be transported in at all. The farthest cannons can only shoot for a little more than 12,000 meters, and after 3,000 meters, who knows where the cannonballs will go. Aerial bombardment wouldn't work. There were a few other methods left, but they would all require a huge price in lives and casualties. This might not even guarantee the successful destruction of Zul'Vagurub. This was a consequence that none of the countries in the Alliance could bear. Moreover, after fighting for so long, the Alliance had only seen 2 or 3 high-ranking priests. The enemy's boss, the evil god Hacker, was nowhere to be seen. William punched the wall in frustration. His exaggerated wrist strength caused a hole to appear in the cement wall. "William. The Heaven Breaker is on its way. Actually, Valilla tried to comfort William. William suddenly turned around, his eyes bloodshot from staying up for days and nights. "Valilla, you don't understand. Of course, we can give all the most important tasks to Uncle Duque. But what if Uncle Duque isn't around one day? What if we're the only ones left to save the world? I'm not a child anymore. I have to learn to deal with problems independently." Valilla opened her mouth to say something, but Breer Bearskin pulled his old partner back and shook his head at her. Valilla was silent. At this moment, William, who had suddenly stretched his hand out of the cement wall, pinched the cement powder in his hand. As a temporary building, the cement wall of the command wasn't completely dry. It was supposed to be extremely hard and could even be used as a city wall, but now it seemed a little sluggish. When he pinched it hard, it turned into powder. "Wait. Uncle Lang, you said that your heavy cannons only lack a strong base? What if I can provide an extremely strong base for the dwarven artillery?" William seemed to have thought of something. Bulang rolled his eyes. "As long as you can get that evil god into the firing range of the artillery, my men will help you blow it up into the sky. But how are you going to get my cannon through so many complicated swamps?" "Uncle Bulang, let me try something else. I don't want you to give me 10,000 tons of explosives. I want 10,000 tons of cement." William slammed the table. "Since the Doomsday Army can pollute the Soterer River to block the lifeline of Lordaeron, why can't we use cement to fill every river, every gully, and every inch of mud in Zul'Vagurub?" William waved his arms excitedly. His assumption was too exaggerated. It sounded a little whimsical, but when he thought about it carefully, it seemed possible. For a moment, even Bulang was stunned. "The Alliance doesn't seem to have that much cement?" Bulang could only mutter. William's expression froze upon hearing this answer. At this moment, Duque's voice came at the right time. "We didn't have it in the past, but it's different now." Duque led Magni, the 3 Windrunner sisters, and the other higher-ups of the Alliance into the command center. "Uncle Duque. You've arrived with the Heaven Breaker?" William's face was filled with obvious surprise. "Yes, your idea is indeed exaggerated. But since all the conventional tactics don't work, why don't you try your strange idea? Why do you have to restrict your thoughts with so-called common sense and principles?" "William, I'm on your side this time." Duque smiled as he walked over and patted William's shoulder. "Then, cement," Duque smiled. Cement has always been a scarce resource in the Alliance. Almost every city's reconstruction can't do without it. However, the Alliance's supply of cement has always been very low. The main reason is that we had to import the raw material for cement from the Ngoro crater in the Kalandor continent, limestone, which is mainly volcanic ash. What about now? Bulang sensitively noticed the key point in Duque's words. Duque clapped his hands and said an exciting piece of news. Although the Alliance has flooded the molten core according to the agreement with the Hydaxia water elemental creatures, we have never said that we will give up on developing the Black Rock Mountain. With the Black Rock Mountain, which was once a nightmare, the Alliance can easily produce 1 million tons of cement per month. 1 million tons? This shocking figure made all the higher-ups of the Alliance ecstatic. The higher-ups of the Alliance who had used reinforced concrete would no longer be interested in walls made of stone and mud. The hardness of the two was not on the same level. Furthermore, traditional stone walls had the problem of being too heavy. As long as some of the pillars of the wall were destroyed, the weight of the wall would crush it. Originally, because the cement production had always been too low, they had no choice but to use the best steel on the cutting edge. No one had thought that there would be such a benefit after conquering the molten core. How could they not be happy? Zul'Gurub was very large. As the capital of the Gurubashi Empire, one of the two troll empires, Zul'Gurub occupied a very large area. Surrounded by huge walls that were somewhat trapezoidal, Zul'Gurub was more than 300 kilometers wide from east to west, and more than 500 kilometers from north to south. If they attacked the core area forcefully, it was unknown how many people would die. But now, with William's strategy, the Alliance could obviously push forward layer by layer. Duke laughed. That's a stupid idea. If we could use money and manpower to solve hackers' problem, we wouldn't be able to do so. If we can use money and manpower to solve hackers' problem, then the price is obviously worth it. Before rushing to the Sin Dorii Kingdom, the limestone mining of the molten core had actually already begun. Duque directly made the air fleet, which was originally rushing back to the Iron Stove Castle to replenish their ammunition, change their route to the Black Rock Mountain and transport a large amount of limestone over. The Alliance used a full half a month to slowly push the front line to the waterfall a little north of the main entrance of Zul'Gurub. That was an important source of the Zul'Gurub water system. Hundreds of mixers were lined up on top of the waterfall. According to Duque's instructions, they slowly poured the mixed cement slurry according to the proportion. The cement slurry seemed very thin, but under the huge amount of water from the waterfall, it was instantly washed away to who knows where. But after 3 days, they could clearly see the results. The river in the distance seemed to have become narrower for no reason, and the water flow became more rapid. But the waterways also became distorted. On the 5th day, the main route began to change. On the 7th day, 2 lakes mysteriously dried up. On the 14th day, all the Gurubashi trolls felt that something was wrong. Chapter 1243. At the end of February 22nd, year 22 of the Dark Portal, Zul'Gurub was supposed to have a high water season. The heavy rainfall directly caused every river in the troll capital to flow terrifyingly fast. This was why the Alliance army had been helpless before. Now, the amount of water in the river suddenly became like a dry year. Looking at the continuous rain in the sky, the trolls panicked. They all ran to ask Hacker's priests. The priests went to the high-ranking priests, and even alarmed Hacker. The problem was that Hacker was the evil god of chaos. This kind of trivial matter in his eyes was not worth disturbing. In a rage, he swallowed many troll believers as sacrifices before he calmed down. Days passed, and the amount of water decreased day by day. A month later, the trolls who had been defending the depths of Zul'Gurub finally discovered the problem. A large amount of white material flowed down from upstream, blocking up all the rivers. It also caused a large number of piranhas to die. Many amphibious creatures like the crocodiles died, and the ones that were alive were not much better off. Most of them were dying. Some troll hunters tried to dissect the crocodile's corpses and found that the crocodile's lungs were filled with a grayish-white material. The trolls finally panicked a little. On a hill near the main entrance to the west of Zulf-Gurub, Duque stood with a group of Alliance powerhouses. They watched as the water of Zulf-Gurub passed through a newly built temporary dam and was diverted into Lake Nafaridi through the former venture capital company's camp. The big shots of the Alliance were all filled with emotion. No one had thought that rivers could be used like this. Especially the dwarves and gnomes. Their eyes were filled with fanaticism as they looked at Duque's back. Once upon a time, all steam technology was viewed as heresy on this continent, and even in the entire world. After all, Azeroth was a world of swords and magic. Duque's appearance changed everything. Even the harshest and most conservative old nobles had to admit that the swords produced by a large dwarven factory in a month could supply the soldiers of an entire kingdom. The economic value of a train track was greater than that of 10,000 carriages. Now, even rivers could be changed, lakes could be drained, and even natural moats could be changed. What else couldn't technology do? If it wasn't for the fact that the weapons brought about by technology were still unable to defeat the most powerful mages and all kinds of special champions and monsters, this might have already become the steampunk world that Duque mentioned. Magni and the other dwarves were full of praises. Magni asked Duque, speaking of which, when did you become a water conservancy expert? How can you be sure that as long as there is enough cement, you can block the river? Duque pursed his lips. Of course he knew. As an engineering student, he had seen too many brutal constructions by construction teams during his internship. For example, the workers would pour the leftover cement into the sewers for convenience. As a result, most of the sewers of the entire building were blocked. It was true that the water would wash away the cement, but a lot of the heavier cement would still be deposited in the river and slowly silted up, forming a dammed lake similar to earthquakes or volcanic activity that would block the valley and silt up the water. Now, Duque had used his engineering knowledge to divert away more than half of the water in Zulf-Gurub. As a result, Zulf-Gurub would have no water to use, and the advancement of the Alliance's army would become smoother. Duque tapped his temple. Knowledge is power. During the 10 years in the Void, I read almost all the books in Karazhan. There are many ancient and alien knowledge that you guys will never have the chance to come into contact with in your lifetime. I don't care about the other books, but give us dwarves and gnomes a copy of the books on water conservancy. The conditions are negotiable. Okay. Duque finger was pointing. Everyone knew that wherever Duque pointed, the mountains and rivers would change according to the wishes of mortals. In the legends, this was already a domain that only gods could touch. This was what made mortals the most excited. After everything was settled, Duque patted William's shoulder. All right, do as I say. We will probably be able to launch an all-out attack on hackers' forces in the summer. Understood. William nodded his head heavily. The problem of the trolls has troubled the previous kings of Stormwind for more than 2,000 years. Even though technology has advanced, don't expect to solve the problem of Zulf-Gurub in a short period of time. Don't compare yourself to the Amani trolls. After all, the Amani trolls only have a bunch of divine creatures with a bit of divinity standing behind them, while the Kubarash trolls in Zulf-Gurub have a true god behind them. Even if it's a third-rate evil god, it's still a true god. Once again confirming that his goal was to slay a god, William still felt a surge of excitement ignite in his blood. All right, I'll leave this place to you. I will bring the main forces of the various countries of Lordaeron to Silithus. Don't throw away the elites of our hometown. Duque laughed. Don't worry, I will be very patient. William promised. Duque wasn't interested in Hacker. After all, a third-rate evil god that was weaker than Ragnaros didn't require Duque to personally deal with it. As long as they followed Duque's method and killed the high-ranking priests of Gurubashi one by one, Hacker's power would also be weakened. It would be the best for William to practice his skills. On the other side, because of Duque's plan, Kel Thuzad had no choice but to use the Scourge army to fight against the Bugmen of Kiraj. Now, there was almost an outcome. Previously, they knew that they had been tricked. After all, both sides were really angry. It was impossible for them to continue to work together to deal with the Alliance and the Horde like before. However, Duquesne knew that the situation of the battle could change at any time. It was already a pleasant surprise that the two of them had been fighting for so long. Move out the Heaven Breaker. We will catch up with the main force of the Alliance. As early as January, the main force of the Alliance had already started the Western expedition. This time, the army that was preparing to attack Silithus was a huge force consisting of 350,000 soldiers and 400,000 logistical troops. Of course, the so-called 400,000 logistical troops were mostly Theramore's soldiers and civilians. The 350,000 soldiers were divided into three parts. The first part was the Night Elves. They set off from the Feathermoon Fortress on the island in the southwest of the Kalandor continent. The total force was about 50,000, but they were all elite sentries and druids. The second part was the Theramore army. Before the Night Elves joined the Alliance, Theramore was the bridgehead of the Alliance in Kalandor. Theramore was far stronger than it had been in history. With Duquesne's intentional or unintentional refugee diversion and support, Theramore had already become a huge military city-state with 150,000 soldiers and 350,000 accompanying family members. This time, apart from leaving 20,000 troops, Theramore had almost turned out in full force. Chapter 1244. On the Heaven Breaker, the deafening hum of the propellers was blocked by a soundproof magic formation. In addition, when Duquesne was designing the Heaven Breaker's blueprint, he had repeatedly emphasized the soundproof layer. Sitting on the Heaven Breaker was not as bumpy and shocking as imagined. Instead, it was like sitting on a boat. On the deck at the stern of the Heaven Breaker was the meeting room. Looking at the bright sunshine outside the window and looking down at the drifting clouds below, the big shots of the Alliance who had never been on a flying battleship felt very novel. Because Turalian and the other three were missing, Mograine had not recovered from his serious injuries, and Solarian, Gina Goldsword, Sally Whitemane, and the others were assigned to William to fight against Hacker. The strongest combat power of the Alliance this time was much weaker than when they fought the Molten Core. This was something that could not be helped. On the other hand, if Duquesne had not thought of a way to make Kel, Thuzad and Si Thun fight each other, the situation of the world would probably be worse than it was now. Suddenly, the sky darkened, and a large group of huge black shadows shrouded the entire flying fleet. This immediately attracted the attention of the guards, but everyone heaved a sigh of relief after that. It was the giant dragon of the Dragon Slumber Shrine. Alexstrasza, the great life-giver, the Red Dragon Queen. Although her dragon form was much smaller than the Heaven Breaker, no one would doubt that the Heaven Breaker was a big toy in her eyes. The huge dragon body shrank rapidly, and when she slowly landed on the main deck, she was that hot and beautiful royal lady again. Hey! My little Dooku, did you think of me, your sister? Or did you forget about me after conquering this little female dragon? Alexstrasza teased Duquesne. Seeing the Red Dragon Queen, Onyxia, who was in the form of Countess Katrana, shrank behind Duquesne like a mouse seeing a cat. Although she was petite in her human form, she could not hide no matter how much she shrank. Come out and show your face. You didn't do anything harmful to the Dragon Slumber Shrine. Just admit your mistake, and the great Red Dragon Queen will forgive you. As Duquesne spoke, he pinched the back of Onyxia's neck, like a mother cat holding a disobedient kitten in its mouth. In the eyes of others, this was as normal as an older brother squeezing his younger sister's neck. However, in the eyes of the Red Dragon Queen, it had a different meaning. Even the back of Duke's neck was. Haha. How interesting. A playful expression appeared on the red-haired mature woman's face. Onyxia felt as if she had been electrocuted. Whether it was the muscles on her face or her entire body, they were all unnaturally stiff. It was one thing to become Duquesne's mount, to be ridden day and night. Admitting defeat in front of his fellow Dragon Clan members was another matter altogether. In front of her dead brother, Onyxia didn't feel anything, perhaps because she thought that Nefarian would definitely die. At this moment, he had to lower his head in front of the strongest dragon race, which was also the Black Dragon race's former nemesis. Firstly, he was displeased, and secondly, this was clearly a public execution. Duque was pinching her neck. This was a declaration of his ownership over her. The most important part of her body, the nape of her neck, was kneaded with a moderate amount of force. Onyxia felt like she was about to explode from the shame. No, she clearly wanted to resist and refused to admit her inferiority in front of Alexstrasza. However, her body was hot, and her face was flushed red. Finally, Onyxia resigned herself to her fate and bowed to the Red Dragon Queen with the etiquette of a human maid. However, she spoke in the dragon language. When translated, the general meaning was, Onyxia, the Sin Dragon under the command of the human Duke Marcus, greets your majesty. The dragons were arrogant. They boasted that they were the origin of all beasts, the existence at the top of the food chain. For her, who had once been enemies with the dragon's slumber shrine, to admit that she was the servant of a lowly creature was actually difficult for her. Because it was too shameful, Onyxia already lowered her head as soon as she finished speaking. Well said. Duque pinched her neck and pulled her back. In the eyes of others, he stroked her neck as if he was petting a cat. Huh. How interesting. The playful expression on Alexstrasza's face became even more obvious. However, she quickly put on a serious face. This time, I want to represent the Dragon Slumber Shrine to discuss the matter of Silithus with the allied forces of the Alliance and the Horde. Can the Dragon Slumber Shrine send out troops this time? Duque asked. Yes, but not many. I took 500 draconic beasts and demi-dragon from Nozdormu. Together with the other 3 factions of the Dragon Slumber Shrine, it will be 1,000. Please understand, as we have been very busy in the Void battlefield, the Queen replied. Hearing this, the big shots of the Alliance all looked touched. After all, it was very rare for the Dragon Slumber Shrine to directly send out troops. Also, the Queen suddenly handed something that looked like a compass to Duque. Sense it yourself. Duque felt it and was dumbfounded. This wasn't a compass at all. It actually marked the status of the Red Dragon Queen, roughly divided into several levels. I'm very busy. If you dare to bother me, I'll reward you with dragon breath. Busy, not mortal destruction, don't call me. On duty, not mortal destruction, but I probably can't leave. Sound asleep, not world destruction, don't call me. A bit idle, call me if there's anything fun. For example, food. 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 Important things must be repeated 3 times. After looking at the 5th level, Duque rolled his eyes. Alexstrasza was still so capricious. But this thing was an upgraded version of debt collector beats, right? Right now, her status was on duty. Phew. Duque exhaled. No matter what, thank you for the support of the Dragon Slumber Shrine. We mortals will work hard. Alright, I'm very busy. I'll leave it to you this time. The Red Dragon Queen came willfully and left willfully. She was just that cool. However, before she left, the words that came from the compass into Duque's spiritual world made Duque silent for a long time. If this world needs a black dragon to inherit the position of the dragon aspect, do you think you can trust Onyxia? To be honest, Duque didn't know the answer to this either. Planet Azeroth's protective magic circle was so powerful that it could even resist the power of Sargeras. There was a foundation for this, and that was the existence of the 5 dragon aspects. Duque had gotten rid of Nesario earlier than in history. Although this had weakened the power of the evil side, it had also given the demons more opportunities. If the position of the dragon aspect wasn't so important, there wouldn't have been so many dragon aspects in history. Duque shook his head and drove this thought out of his mind. Alright, now let's officially discuss how to deal with Naximas. Chapter 1245. Duque first took out a calendar. First of all, if there are no accidents, Naxxramas will regain mobility at 9:00 in the morning on March 11th, and the fortress will be able to fly again. Before Duque finished, Magni had already jumped up. Wait. Naxxramas isn't yours. How can you be so sure that it will regain mobility at this time? Duque looked at Magni as if he was a retard, which made the dwarf king feel guilty. Magni sat down and mumbled in a low voice, "Fine. You guys who play with magic are all cunning." The whites of Duke's eyes rolled up. "Alright, little shorty, you've scolded all the mages. Come to think of it, I just accidentally said it once. Why do you guys remember this kind of sinister curse word so well?" Of course, there was no need for Duque to do anything. The newly advanced Breaking Dawn mage Jaina stabbed the shorty in the butt with her ice sword, causing Magni to cry out in pain. Getting back to the main topic, Duque pressed his hands on the military table. As long as Kel Thuzad doesn't break through to demigod level, he can't do anything to me. This is decided by the realm. Please don't worry too much. And so what if he becomes a demigod? Don't forget, Nefarian and Ragnaros also fell at our feet as demigods. Don't forget. Where did you get your top-grade equipment from? The spoils of war from killing a real demigod were really frighteningly rich. At this point, Magni touched his Balrog hammer, and then looked at Gavin Rad, who was hugging the wind sword as if he was hugging his lover, and laughed at the same time. Including Archimonde, the Alliance had already slaughtered 3 demigods. Duque continued, according to the intelligence, Naxxramas originally had a total of 15, or rather, so many leaders. Then because of the Dalajan bombardment and the battle with Karaj, the most accurate intelligence now is that there are only 6 leaders left. Duque waved his hand, and Vanessa distributed the prepared reports to the big shots. The structural zone's structural giant Thaddeus, the military zone's 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the spider zone's Black Witch Farina and the spider Meisner, then the frost dragon Sapphiron and the ice lich Kel Thuzad? Theon flipped through the report and looked at the introduction of the 6 leaders, as well as the frighteningly detailed characteristics and skills of the leaders. He couldn't help but purse his lips. The enemy had no secrets in Duque's eyes. The so-called god of prophecy was nothing more than this, right? Looking at Duque, he couldn't help but sigh. It's a good thing Duque is on our side. At the military conference table, Duque used magic projection to create the latest 3-dimensional projection of Naxxramas. Originally, Naxxramas had 4 districts, but now because the plague zone was completely destroyed by the Dalajan's main cannon bombardment, there are only 3 left. What we need to do is to kill the leaders of the remaining 3 districts as quickly as possible while Kel Thuzad is trapped. As quickly as possible? You mean we should split up? Tyrant frowned. There weren't many strong alliance fighters participating in this battle, so why should they split up? Yes. There's a very, very important reason here. But I'm sorry, I can't say it now. If you believe me, then please support me. If you don't believe me, then vote. The minority follows the majority, Duque said mysteriously. Everyone couldn't help but narrow their eyes. Aurelia seemed to have thought of something. What about the strong horde fighters? They will help us block the possible arrival of the Karaj leaders when we attack Naxxramas. Then I have no objections. The so-called vote wasn't even a formality. This was no longer the time when the Alliance was founded 21 years ago. At that time, Duque was inexperienced and young. Now, Duque's prestige and power in the Alliance were absolute. Moreover, everyone trusted him 100%. Without any surprises, the big bosses decided to implement the plan of splitting up. At this time, Naxxramas could be said to be gloomy. The intelligent Undying only felt that the situation wasn't good, but it wasn't to the point where they would explode. Kel Thuzad couldn't help but feel lucky that the undead didn't have morale. They were undead, not blind. The Alliance, the Horde, and the Sleeping Dragon Temple had made such a big move. If they couldn't even find this, then they could just burn their own souls as fuel for the soul torch. But Kel Thuzad was helpless. At the height of the battle, he even thought of giving up Naxxramas and leading the army to escape. However, it wasn't that he didn't want to escape, but that he really couldn't. This was the desert region of Silithus. From the Akaraj temple to the border of Silithus, the nearest place was 300 kilometers away. Let's not talk about the fact that low-level undead would quickly die under the sun, such as the rotten flesh of zombies. Even if they could only protect those who could use the power of darkness to protect their bodies and not die from the sun, it would still be very difficult. Silithus was full of huge insect nests. There were at least 1 million zergs in each of the large hives. If they gave up on the dangerous terrain of Naxxramas and exposed the undead army to the desert plains, destruction would be the only outcome. So Thuzad was dragging it out, trying to drag it out until the fortress's floating system was fixed. However, even with his erudition and superb intelligence, he still couldn't deal with the vicious trap that Duque had left in the flying system. If he directly accessed the intelligent management system that originated from the Titan, questions such as, "What is the catchphrase of the Gale Sword Hero?" would pop up. Thuzad didn't know who the Gale Sword Hero was. He casually answered one, and the system would tell him that the correct answer was, "Pretentious like the wind, always by my side." Thuzad patiently listened to these kinds of questions that simply didn't give him a way out. In the end, there were a lot of questions, each one fresh, and each one a pain in the ass. Not only did he feel that his intelligence had been seriously dragged down, but he also felt deeply humiliated. How could Duque play with the Titan creations that even the Burning Legion couldn't understand so smoothly? And he, Thuzad, just couldn't. He didn't believe it. It had to be said that the great mages who could muddle their way to the Breaking Dawn level were all monsters with at least an IQ of more than 200, or some crazy cheating demon with a system. Thuzad used a stupid method. He used painstaking effort to remove all the remaining willpower from the Titan creations. This was very similar to erasing all the formatting of a computer's hard drive. Without destruction, there could be no construction. He destroyed all the programs and systems, and then reprogrammed the Naxxramas floating system according to his own will. Chapter 1246. Rewriting the program of a creation titan's creation was definitely not a simple task. After a month of endless research, Thuzad finally figured out that what kept the fortress suspended in the sky depended on the east, south, west, north, center, plus the top and bottom too. There were a total of 7 things called void power furnaces. As a mage who specialized in necromancy, it was truly a thankless task for him to understand things on the scientific side. The most troublesome thing was that the power furnace that was originally located in the plague area was destroyed, which made the entire fortress lose its original balance. Even if the power furnace was operated according to the original design, Thuzad estimated that it was very likely that even if it flew, the fortress would continue to spin at high speed in the air. It would either fly to an unknown place or fall again. Naxxramas was very strong, but that was relatively speaking. If it fell from a high altitude again, it was estimated that if the fortress did not fall apart, all the various creations inside would collapse. There was only one chance. Thuzad made countless virtual models to explore the power and balance problems of the fortress. He even thought about whether to flip the fortress to the west, because the east side was the plague area that was almost completely destroyed. If the west side was facing down, then the most vulnerable east side would be facing up, avoiding the attack of the insects from underground. The only problem was air defense. Once this idea was put forward, it was firmly opposed by his subordinates. Although there was a leader like the big spider Meisner who was not afraid of environmental changes, most of the Undying were still in human form. They simply could not accept that the originally flat ground of Naxxramas had become a huge vertical wall. Moreover, would placing the most vulnerable side in the sky be able to ignore the enemy's attack? There were also a lot of flying insects and enemy leaders. For example, a big green insect called Princess Huhuran or something. The research was once again in trouble. After eliminating more than 300,000 Titan runes that should be meaningless, Thuzad finally found a strange set of unified commands. Generally speaking, when he typed up on the almost blank control panel, the entire fortress would generate an upward force. Typing down would cause it to go down. Ha ha ha. I found it. I found it. Kel Thuzad was ecstatic. He handed over almost all of the defense to the only intelligent leader, the Black Witch Farina, while he focused on breaking the control system of the stronghold. There was no other way. Originally, for the sake of ease of control, Kel Thuzad didn't place too many highly intelligent leaders in the stronghold. Because his will was enough to control the entire fortress. As the battle progressed, the weaker leaders of each district were either killed or killed by the Dalajan's cannons. The only one left who was more intelligent was Farina. The rest were either martial artists, brainless constructs, or otaku liches who focused on forbidden magic and biological research. Farina, I'll leave the defense to you while I focus on researching the flying system of the stronghold. My request is not to let any of the functional areas fall into enemy hands. Don't let them invade the core area. If there's any danger, you must run to me immediately. Understood. The beautiful Dark Witch subconsciously squeezed her Mariana trench, only to realize that she was flirting with a blind man, no, a lich without a penis. However, she was really fascinated by the power. Especially when thousands of soldiers were willing to die under her command. The pleasure brought by supreme power almost made her moan with joy. But soon, she couldn't laugh anymore. As a mage, her aptitude was second-rate. If he knew her character, Kel Thuzad wouldn't have been interested in sending her to the front lines. As a result, she was basically a spectator in the war against the insects. The terrifying sea of insects almost stunned her from the start. As a last resort, she sent the powerful abominations and the Death Knights early on. Oh. The twin emperors were the two leaders of the Angela Temple, second only to Si Thun. Their combat power was not the strongest under Si Thun's command, but they were undoubtedly the most suitable to be commanders. Almost as soon as the Scourge's reaction became slow, the brothers sensed it. But they didn't respond immediately. After fighting for so many months, they were very clear about how difficult it was to deal with the lich leader Kel Thuzad. They instinctively suspected that this was a trap. However, when they secretly changed the composition of the attacking troops, using the high-mobility flying insects to beat the abominations who lacked cover, and using the long-range attack insects to tease the Death Knights, they confirmed that the enemy's commander had changed. Thus, an even grander and more meticulous attack was launched. Attacking separately, creating a diversion, all kinds of tactical combinations made the Scourge under Farina's command lose their bearings. But the Scourge was still considered a large force. The liches continued to use the corpses to create abominations and other undead warriors, using more troops to maintain the front lines from collapsing. Until March 11th. In the northwest of Silithus stood the newly built fortress of the Cenarian Circle. On this day, this fortress, built with natural magic in the desert, welcomed an endless stream of troops. Green-skinned orcs, mostly lilac elves, and white-skinned humans. 3 long lines of soldiers stretched from the edge of the fortress to the sky. Along with them were huge dragon men and dragon beasts. What was even more unimaginable was that the dwarves were chanting, and since the fall of Naxxramas, they had been laying the railway at an astonishing speed of 3,500 meters per day. The steam locomotive transported the pre-built prefabricated rails to the end of the railway, and the dwarven construction workers carried them and laid the railway. Because of the conspiracy of a transmigrator, 5 years ago, in the name of importing volcanic ash to make cement, a high-quality dual-gauge railway was built from the Tanaris Desert to the Ngoro crater from the hot sand port in the southeast of the Kalandor continent, in the name of importing volcanic ash to make cement. All the dwarven workers had to do now was to build from the crater's pass to the Cenarian Circle, a distance of more than 100 kilometers. With the railway, there would be artillery, and there would be a steady stream of supplies. Kel Thuzad had a deep understanding of the Alliance's tactics. Duque had single-handedly brought Naxxramas here as cannon fodder, so he had long been sensitive to the Alliance's actions. Now that the Alliance tribe and the Sleeping Dragon Temple had come together, everyone knew that after the Alliance had settled the internal strife, they had freed up their hands and were ready to pick up the peaches. Kel Thuzad couldn't take it anymore, and announced to the entire fortress, "Attention all members of the Scourge, the fortress has begun to move." You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.